Welcome to Mormonism Live, everybody. I'm Bill Reel. This is Radio Free Mormon. And tonight, we're talking about Joseph Smith's polygamy. Whether you call them polygamy deniers, whether you call them monogamy affirmers, we want to sit and have a conversation tonight with our guest, Jeremy Hoop, about Joseph Smith's polygamy. Last week, we talked about the Clayton journals. Tonight, we have Jeremy on to give us his insights into those journals and for us to have a vulnerable, frank conversation around whether Joseph Smith was a polygamist or not. And so with that, I'm going to bring Jeremy Hoop on. Mr. Radio Free Mormon, how are you tonight?
I was going to say, I'm fine tonight too, by the way. Thank you, Bill. But I know that there's a whole lot that's set up. Hi, Jeremy Hoop. Hoopa! How you doing? Now, we haven't met before, have we?
No, not in the flesh or not virtually.
But you've seen my Quinn impression, apparently. And I want to know, what do you think when I refer to you as Hoopa?
That's one of the better things I've been called. So I like it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead. In kindergarten, when all my classmates realized what my last name spelled backwards was, it was over from there. So
Hoop?
So Hoop is fine.
Oh, no. But Winnie, though.
They never gave me the Winnie. They just gave me the rest.
They would.
Yeah. Well, let's get out of the 100-acre woods and let's jump into it. So I'm going to put up
so good at these segues, I've got to tell you.
Yeah, I'm trying. All right, so here's our thumbnail. We want to jump right into it. We got a lot to cover tonight, and we'll see how far we get. Last week, we had a conversation, RFM and I had a conversation around the Clayton journals, and we were poking at, and I'll just be frank, we were being a little maybe strong towards Dr. McKay and his story behind how he got the journals, how he passed them on to you, and then the timing of when you chose to share them.
Yeah.
And so I want to present just a couple of the issues, and then I'll give you a few minutes to address it. And I want you to have the space to say whatever you want to say about this. But the two main criticisms I think that we pointed out in that moment was that James Allen had died back in September 2nd of 24. And then you had just released the journals just recently, coinciding with you having had them for a while. It sounds like you had them before he had passed away, and you had been working on a book, The Clayton Conundrum. And so you come forward with the journals and with at least the manuscript of the book that you've written. And one of the criticisms I had for you was about whether the journals could have been released on September 3rd in terms of just when he died and when you guys said, like, hey, once he's passed away, we can release them. And so I'll let you address that here in just a second. And then I just want to know, RFM, do you want to articulate the second criticism that you had in the next couple of slides?
Do you want to go one-on-one? Because I have at least a couple things to say about the one that you just said.
Why not? Why not September 3rd of 2024?
I waited past his death, past Dean Jesse's death, which was in December 2025. And Dean Jesse was the other person responsible for the typescript. At that point, my book was close to completion. And so nearing that part where I thought, okay, I want to be able to roll the book out along with the journals. Didn't have a website. I'd been taking a break from my podcast for probably 9 months to focus on the book. Within about 4 months, I started working on a website, got a website together. Then the timing of the website, the book being to a point where I was ready to talk about it, that coincided, and that's when I released them. So it wasn't, there wasn't a thought process of, he died today, so therefore I must release them tomorrow. There was also getting through the other participants passing and then finishing the book. I wanted to ultimately, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You're talking about Dean Jesse now dying in December of 25. This is the first time I'm hearing about this. Now, I haven't listened to all of your podcasts, and I've listened to hardly any. Okay, so if you've mentioned it there, forgive me. Is this the first time you're mentioning this publicly?
I have mentioned it on a Facebook thread. I haven't talked about the coincidence with the passings of James Allen or Dean Jesse. I just mentioned someone had to pass away. I didn't.
But you weren't talking about Dean Jesse. You were talking about James Allen, or am I wrong?
I'm referring to both of them. Both of them were involved, and the last thing when McKay communicated to me about James Allen, he just thought, I don't want to bring drama into his life in case it would, and so we held off then. And then I waited till after Both had passed, and the book was far enough along that I was
But it
ready
wasn't finished. The book was not finished in
close.
December of 25, right? When Dean Jesse passed away?
Correct. It was close, but it wasn't quite finished now.
So you would not have released that transcript anyway before that,
Most likely.
because you had told us earlier, I think, that you wanted to release the book and the transcript together, correct?
Yes, that's correct. In fact, when I first received the journals, I knew enough about Clayton and his record. I'd been studying him for about, oh gosh, almost 10 years. Well, not 10 years at that point, but I've studied him for close to 10 years at this point. I knew enough about the journals that when I got them, I realized there's a lot here. And I didn't want to release them into a vacuum. I wanted to be able to put an argument alongside with them, because I felt that they needed to be explained in a way that they hadn't previously been explained. So
how long
so I wrote
before, I'm sorry, September 2nd, 2024 is the date that James B. Allen passed away.
Yeah.
How long before that date did you get a hold of the journal transcripts?
I had them in November of October of 2023.
So almost a full year before that?
Almost a full year.
So then that means it's actually 11 months. So it was 21 months after his death that you released everything. According to my calculations, if we add another 11 to that, that's a total of 32 months you had the transcript before you released it?
Almost, yeah, 2 years, 8 months-ish.
Did you ever have the thought that what you were doing with these journal transcripts, obviously you recognize their importance and how
Sure.
the church has been hiding them for years and continues to not release them and get kind of upset when people do? Yes.
And other things. The church hangs on to a lot of things, not just the Clayton journals, but yes.
Over half of their records. That's correct. Yeah.
Had you ever considered that maybe you might be doing a similar thing by having the journal transcripts and not releasing them for about 2.5 years?
Well, first of all, I waited 6 months roughly between December. Well, between June. When did I release them? Almost 7 months. So not 2.5 years. 7 months from Dean Jesse's passing. Okay.
But
So
I'm talking about from when you got the journals and we're not releasing them.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, okay. So technically, I could have violated McKay's ask, and I could have released them that very day. I could have just put him out in the wind. Okay. I could have done that. I chose not to. Secondarily,
Dr. McKay asked you to not release them until after what?
After James Allen's passing, and I knew Dean Jesse was involved, so I decided to keep working on the book while both were alive. When both were passed, my book was far enough along that the time had come to release them.
Did Dr. McKay tell you why James Allen? Why? Excuse me. Did Dr. McKay tell you why he was asking you to not publish the transcripts until after James B. Allen passed?
Well, one of the things I asked him was, well, is this guy of sound mind? He said very clearly yes. And for anybody who wants to hear that, I have an interview with McKay Platt where I ask him those questions. Secondarily,
you agree that he's biased. He's a biased witness.
Well, I would ask anyone to prove otherwise. But
I'm just saying that the one witness that's on the stand is obviously biased. I'm not saying that he's lying. I'm just saying
we're going to make a charge. If we're going to make a charge against someone that he's taking advantage of an elderly man, we might want to have proof that he's doing so.
I just said he's biased, and I think that's obvious, don't you?
Well, sure. He's a friend of James Allen's, and this is his story, and you can take it up with him.
And I'm saying his only bias, if it's not patently obvious, okay. His obvious bias is that he's the one who ends up getting the transcript from James Allen, who's apparently in his 90s and in a nursing home of some sort.
Yeah.
He gets it. So obviously it's in his interest. It's in Dr. McKay's interest to say that he was of sound mind, right? That's all I'm saying.
Oh, sure. You could assume he's lying.
I didn't assume that. I just said he obviously has a bias.
Or either he's not telling the truth or he's telling the truth. And if according to his testimony,
and either he has a bias or he has a bias.
And if his bias is leading to him lying, then he's lying. And if he's not lying, he's not lying. And the question is there any proof from anyone that James Allen was non-compos mentis?
I don't know. Was there any other witness?
Okay. I don't, this is going to be a circular conversation.
Actually, it's being quite illuminating right now, but Bill probably wants it to continue on a different course.
Yeah,
there's one witness to that conversation between James Allen and McKay Platt, one.
And you agree that Dr. McKay has a bias in the matter?
Sure.
By the way, I think
that's all I was saying.
Yeah, I think our opinion is a lot more innocently than you're taking it. It's just that when we come to situations and we're personally involved and invested, whether we're telling the truth or we're not, we come to situations with biases, and he wasn't
Sure.
a neutral observer. He had some biases. That's all. Were you aware that Dean Jesse was in failing health and was close to passing away?
I was aware that he was very old, that he was in his mid 90s or
Yeah.
however old, you know,
Yeah.
in a similar condition. Correct. Yeah.
Would you, again, I'm just, I know you're feeling probably like we're coming at you. I just, would you have waited 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more years if Dean Jesse's health allowed him to stay alive?
Very possibly. Yeah.
Okay.
Why? Why are you so worried about what they might do if they're alive when you release the journal transcript?
Look, I went off of my friend McKay's ask, and I thought about that, and I took it seriously. Like I said, I could have released them the day after I got them.
Right.
You know, I was under no ethical obligation other than to my friend, who asked me to hold on to them. But at the same time, I also didn't want to release them into a vacuum. I wanted to release them with a book.
Yeah.
And so I wrote the book, and I don't apologize for that.
No, and I'm sure we'll go on here. I'll just express my confusion between the two different rationales it seems I'm hearing from you for the timing of the release of the transcript. One of which is you wanted to release it with the book. The other is you wanted to wait for these two gentlemen to pass away first.
Well, they happen to be somewhat coincident. So both men are in their 90s. James Allen, for all I knew, could hang on for 2, 3, 4 years. Okay, so I'm writing a book. He's passed away in September 2024. Dean Jesse holds on and passed away the next year. My book is almost done at that point. In fact, it's done to the point of final editing. And then just a few months later, I prepare a website, and then I release them. So that's the timing of the whole incident.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
And I'll just say in your favor, Jeremy, and specifically in Dr. McKay's favor, I have a friend who works behind the scenes to help us with our content. And I had forgotten about this. He had told me this 4 or 5 years ago. But he had an association with James B. Allen. And he was in connection with James up until a week and a half before he passed. And from my understanding of the conversation that person had with me, Mr. Allen was coherent and with it. And so my raising doubts about James Allen's health or mental cognitive ability seems to be incorrect. And so for that, I'll just acknowledge that there doesn't seem to be anything inappropriate there in that regard. And so we can move on from that. If that's
I think that's fine. I can understand why people would wonder. You know, it's a man in his 90s, and this is a record he'd held on to for all those years. And according to a number of historians who requested them, he turned them down. The only thing I have to say is that he changed his mind, apparently. According to McKay, he asked him, he said yes, gave no restrictions. He didn't make any comment further other than, yeah, come on over and I'll give it to you, which can seem odd to people, but that's the story. That's what McKay has assured me of. And then he passed them to me precisely because of our friendship and what he knew that I had researched and the work that I had done on William Clayton. And here we are.
So you did, it took, am I correct in understanding it was 2 years and 8 months from the time you got the transcript until you finished the book?
The book was to a point where I was ready to say, yeah, we're basically done. Shortly after, so right around the beginning of 2026.
Okay, so what, 2 years then?
Yeah, about 2 years. Yeah, a little over that. So from when I got them in October-ish 2023 to that point.
Yeah. I don't know, RFM, if you want to articulate this, you know,
well, these are some of the things that we found in a document by James B. Allen. You're probably aware of it. I don't know if you are. Yep. There's some dialogue. We talked about it where he says 4 times what his feeling is, which is that these transcripts of the William Clayton journals, which he has a transcript. I think that's undeniable that he has a transcript that he made for his own use in the church historian's office. But that time and again, he was very clear, at least in this document from the mid-90s, that he did not believe the transcript or the contents of the William Clayton Journal should be released to the public unless the church gave permission.
He wrote that in 1995. I can't speak to his state of mind between 1995 and 2023, pardon me.
But at least McKay intimated to you that that the church's permission was no longer required, that he was okay with them being released at a certain point without the church's permission.
What I was told was that they were given freely with no restrictions.
Because there's no conditions on it, right?
None whatsoever. And that's the only thing I know. Is that
and the story from Dr. McKay is that there were no conditions. It was nothing about you can release them after I die. It was just here they are.
Correct. So
and nothing was talked about releasing them one way or the other. Is that correct?
Between McKay and I?
Between McKay and Allen.
James Allen and McKay. I apologize. Between McKay and I.
No, between McKay and Allen. Your answer was
no. To my knowledge, no.
Okay.
To my knowledge, no. McKay and I talked about it.
Understood.
But not,
So, last week we went through the Clayton journals.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill. Just one other thing from this, because I don't want to be passed off so easy, as this was the mid-90s and you don't know what he was thinking in 2023. Do you have any other data point after the mid-90s indicating that his position on this issue had changed?
No, I don't. In fact, I saw one historian's 2019 email that would seem to indicate there was a big, to-do on Facebook, a discussion, and this historian had requested them. I can't remember if the email had addressed that or not specifically about not wanting to, get sideways with the church or anything like that. But it appeared from that email that one of the justifications was, I don't know if my typescript is accurate. That was one of them. I don't know if that was just a hedge.
It is.
And one of the other justifications, I can't remember, honestly. So I don't know. I have no indication whether anyone else had any indication he had changed his mind. All I know is what McKay said.
Okay, but as of 2019, I had not heard about this exchange. You're saying that James B. Allen was refusing to release the transcript to a historian who had asked?
Correct. Yep. 2019.
Okay, 2019. So just 4 years
earlier. That's correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you're not certain that you recall the reason for it being that he thought the church had to give permission first.
I could. It's out there somewhere on Facebook. I don't remember exactly. It can be found.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So then last week we got into the journals themselves, and there was a clip of audio from your conversation in the very first episode you did, where you said, "I've got the Clayton journals."
Yes.
And you had indicated that you indicated that if historians knew what was in these journals and approached them the right way, that there would be no claims of polygamy. Again, I don't know the exact words, and I know the interpretation is going to differ a little bit, but the way I took it was you were denying that there was polygamy in the journals. So our episode last week, we went through the various points in the Clayton journals where it, to me anyway, and I think to RFM, clearly shows that polygamy is occurring. And then we got into John Turner's book, and we went into the story about the Moon sisters and Lydia and Clayton, and can the covenant be revoked? And no, it can, and that whole story. And then we showed how that story was essentially evidence, the provenance of all the details that John got was in the William Clayton journal, at least what I thought was the most controversial details.
Sure.
And I think Turner, for me, puts the story together really well. And when I go and read the Clayton journals, it seems quite obvious that this is the best interpretation based on the modern understanding of historians dealing with Mormonism of how to interpret these things. And so in my mind, I thought, the way you're approaching it is like, oh, this is being misinterpreted, or, this is Brigham Young ordering Clayton to add this later on. And in my mind, I'm thinking that's really going to be a stretch. So what I wanted to do, I'll put this slide back up. There's so much evidence that you and the others involved in, again, polygamy denier, monogamy affirmer, that movement, there's so much evidence. I sat down with Clark Abood and had a hours and hours long conversation, and then brought Dan Vogel on to do a rebuttal against all of that, and that was hours and hours. So
Yeah.
there's so much evidence. There's no way we could get into that tonight.
Yeah.
And so talking to you before the show to prepare for our conversation tonight, I definitely wanted to give you a chunk of time. In my mind, I'm thinking hopefully 20, 30 minutes tops, where you can explain to the audience at a really high level what is going on. So rather than deal with each of these entries and the John Turner story, just tell us what you think is happening that would explain all of it together.
Sure. Appreciate that.
Off the screen, and you can put your slides up if you have any.
So I'll start off by, yes, my statement in my video was very provocative. I recognize that. Sometimes I make provocative statements, but they're purposeful. The statement that I make is, if people understood what are in the journals, they wouldn't speak about them the way that they do. Meaning, they wouldn't call them a contemporaneous personal diary of the type that Clayton kept regularly. That's the meaning behind that statement. In that same video, I went on to address that there's about a dozen very explicit entries, mostly conversations he's having with Joseph Smith. There's one entry, August 16th, 1843, talks about E giving permission for Joseph to take E and EP, which is assumed to be Emily and Eliza Partridge, as wives on August 16th. That entry has interesting features to it that need to be discussed. But I don't deny at all, of course, that the entries are there. They're there, and they say what they say. William McClellan in 1872 has stuff that he says about Fanny Alger. The question with any historical source is it reliable? And what is it? When was it done? Under what circumstances? Are there biases and interest in the statement? Are there any incongruencies, contradictions with other sources, etc.? And so with this record, it has been treated, I'll share my screen here, it's been treated like an intimate, contemporaneous daily diary. George D. Smith's, the title of his compendium is an intimate chronicle, and he treats it very similarly to the way, in fact, let me see if I can share my screen here. What am I doing? Oh, that's what I did. I apologize. While I'm talking, he treats it like the Manchester Diary. I don't know if you're familiar with the Manchester Diary, but that diary is quite intimate, personal, and something that, well, I'm having trouble. I apologize. I had it here, and now I can't bring it up. Oh, this is me being really not tech savvy. There we go. So if we take a look at, and
so am I understanding that you disagree with George Smith on the subject of whether the journals are intimate and basically daily recordings?
Yes, but it's based on the evidence internal and related to the journals. They are a very different kind of record from his other personal records. In the book, we expend about 250 pages going through all of the evidence that we can ascertain, internal and related to the journals, both his history as a writer, as a keeper of records, his history with his personal records. There's a term that gets us a little bit trapped at times, and the word is journal. Like you'll hear, for example, well, when it comes to Joseph Smith and polygamy, there's all these women who wrote stuff in their journals, but are they a daily record that they kept in 1843, 44? No, they wrote things in what we would call their journal 20, 40, 60 years later. And so that's a different manner of record than something that will be kept at the time. And that's really where the crux of this comes. Is this record, the Nauvoo Journal, similar in nature to his Manchester Diary, his Winter Quarters Diary? Is it more like his Pioneer Journal? His Pioneer Journal was written for an audience. He actually says within the Pioneer Journal, I will not write my thoughts here because I expect my family will read this record as well as members of the church. So he's writing for an audience within that Pioneer Journal. It's a different kind of record, meaning he's not going to be as forthright or candid within the pages of that record. He does the same with his Polygamy Mission Journal in 1852-53. The Manchester Diary is so candid that 13 pages of it have to be redacted. That he admits to sexual temptation for Sarah Crooks, that he spends day after day after day after day in intimate situations with women. That's an intimate daily diary of the kind that we're trying to discuss.
Well, this is pretty intimate, isn't it? The intimate details of himself and the Moon Sisters in bed together.
In fact, let's go to that. So that's there's two arguments that people make to try to assess that the journals are indeed authentic contemporaneous diaries. The first one is this: he just writes embarrassing stuff about himself. He writes all this candid, revealing stuff. Ergo, it's a truthful recording. And that kind of builds on what historians talk about, a record that's prejudicial to oneself. This is from Louis Gottschalk. He writes one of the best books on historical method. And he says, more dependably, when a statement's prejudicial to a witness, his dear one's causes, etc., it's likely to be truthful. That's why confessions, if not forcibly extracted by those in good health, are considered excellent testimony, etc. But, he says, the historian must be careful, however, to make sure that the statement really is considered by the witness to be prejudicial to himself. John DeLynn made this point with John Turner the other day. He's like, well, are you sure that Clayton would really be embarrassed by what he wrote? So here's the question. Are the things that he wrote within the Nauvoo journal like the things he wrote in his Manchester diary? His Manchester diary, like I said, he admits to being in love with Sarah Crooks, a woman not his wife. This is 1840, okay, prior to an introduction to plural marriage, okay, formally by Joseph Smith, according to his telling. He spends all this time in intimate situations, foot washing, 8 times a ritual, interesting ritual with Sarah Crooks and with Betsy Poole. And then 13 pages have to be redacted. So much so, and every one of these redactions is all around conversations about or with women. And
right, but of course, the Nauvoo, the William Clayton journals that we're talking about, that you got the transcript of, hasn't just been redacted; it's been hid by the church and continues to be hid by the church. Completely.
Yeah, by the church,
yes.
By the church, but not by Clayton. And here's the distinction.
Oh, you're saying Clayton redacted these?
Clayton or someone in his family.
Ah,
we don't know who, but this was held till long after his death. I think it was given to the church in the 1970s, I believe. So this is a truly prejudicial record. With the Clayton journals...
But wait, you're presuming that, aren't you? You're presuming that what's redacted would be prejudicial?
Well, someone thought it should be covered up. Just like, for example, in Heber Kimball's journal, he has a little line that says in there, on January 21st, 1841, he's with Ellen Redmond alone in his apartment. She combs his head. He writes, we washed our feet and went to bed. Someone with a penknife scratched it out, didn't want people to read it. You can still read the words. That's prejudicial, meaning, we can interpret that in various ways. However, someone thought it should be covered up. Someone thought this should be covered up. The Nauvoo journals contain no such thing. The LDS Church has held it back for whatever reasons. I honestly can't figure out why, especially after the leaks, because there's no more sensational stuff in the available transcripts. That's all out. All that polygamy stuff, the 12 entries plus the other about 10 more that are suggestive. That's all already out there. There's nothing new in there. What the giveaway for Clayton, number one, when he's writing, he is a martyr. Number two, when he's writing, Margaret is the one causing him pain. Diantha's causing him pain. Aaron Farr is causing him pain. He prays, oh Lord, help them change their minds, change their hearts. By the way, we analyzed this extensively in the book. And the kicker is he donated the journal to the church. He freely gave it up to an institution that had institutional power over him, that had ecclesiastical power over him. If you're going to have a prejudicial record and you're going to make a copy of it, okay, we'll talk about that here in a second. He made a copy. Okay, and you're going to hand it over to an institution. The question is, can we reasonably say that Clayton himself treats this record as prejudicial? Okay, so that's the number one. We can't use the embarrassing things that we consider embarrassing.
For a second, I got to make the observation. From my point of view, you switched from intimate to prejudicial, and I know we've used them both a little bit interchangeably. Yes, okay. But from my point of view, this Manchester diary you're talking about, however intimate it might be, I mean, the journals that you have the transcript of are at least as intimate as anything you've read there. So I see them as both intimate journals, which according to your argument indicates that they are made contemporaneously, correct?
Let's distinguish between intimate and prejudicial, okay? revealing something he wouldn't want out. That's the prejudicial term. The Manchester Diary definitely has things in there that he wouldn't want people to know. The Nauvoo Diary he gave to the church historians when he was 31 and when he was
presuming when you argue that the Manchester Diary definitely has things that William Clayton didn't want to know, you are presuming, are you not, that he is the one that did the redactions?
No, it could be him or his family. We don't know.
His family could think that they don't want people to know about it, whereas he was fine with it.
But he didn't give that record to the church. He held on to it and kept it personal. That's the difference. With the Nauvoo Journal, he gave it to the church when he was 31, permanently, and never retrieved it. So ask yourself, what person will give their personal, intimate diary permanently to a church, never to retrieve it, and not make a copy of it? Okay, that's the question. We actually deal with that extensively in the book.
And could it have something to do with the fact that it's also not just about him, it's also about Joseph Smith, and that the church historian and the church as an institution would have an interest in holding on to that?
Potentially, but here's the answer to that question. One of the first things that we have to understand about the Nauvoo journals is they're not the original text. That's not in question. That is incontrovertible. It's acknowledged by Robin Jensen, by John Turner, and by the JSP. So first of all, the record we have today was not what Clayton wrote originally. So this answers why would he give the record to the church? Because whatever was the original, he retained. And he gave the copy. And by the way, when I say copy, his method was when he would copy the original, he would expand or otherwise, according to JSP, otherwise change the original. They know that because they have some of the original text for some of the entries in the Nauvoo journals. They also have overlapping entries from 2 volumes that they can compare.
So you're saying there are 2 copies of his journal. Do you have a copy of the original journal?
No one does. It's not extant. So, however, we have proof that there's an original text from which he was working because we have 4 overlapping entries between Journal A and Journal B.
Jeremy, before you get into the extrinsic stuff, okay?
Yes,
and by extrinsic, I mean kind of weeds. Can you tell me, is there any historical entry or record or reference to there being 2 journals? In other words, an original that he wrote, and then he copied one and gave the copy to the church.
What the way that Jensen and Turner interpret it is that they use the term notes. He kept daily notes. Turner says possibly a day book.
Yes.
Okay. There is evidence within the journals that the original notes themselves would have been of the same substance of something like his Manchester Diary, meaning substantial enough, containing enough detail that he expanded the same detail into different entries in different ways. But there's enough of the same detail to say he kept substantial notes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what I'm hearing right now is a no. There is no definite historical entry saying that there are 2 copies, an original and a copy.
Well, there is for certain an original text. The question is, what was that original text? That is certain. Okay, let me read to you from Robin Jensen.
No, I mean, does he quote the history?
No, what he's done is he has analyzed. Okay, the way that you get there is 2 things. The JSP has original notes that they have that they can compare that form the basis of some of the Nauvoo journal entries. They have some of those original notes.
And the original notes are written by William Clayton.
Correct. In fact, it says Clayton's journals contain entries for which an earlier text is extant, and comparisons of these entries indicate that when he copied his notes, he often expanded or otherwise changed them.
Right, because he's making notes in his day book, and then he's either getting home that night or at some point later, and then fleshing them out into a bit more of a narrative.
Yes, it could be within hours, it could be within days, it could be within weeks, it could be within months, it could be later. We don't know when he went from original to the formal journal. There's no way to know exactly when pen hit that paper. The model is that they use is that he did it within days to a week, and John Turner calls them near contemporaneous. However, there are challenges to that interpretation because of the anomalies of the journals and how they're constructed.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just want to slow down and just talk to the audience for a second. So this is the crux of the whole issue with the Clayton journals. Again, the naive view that all of us come to this history with is that Clayton is sitting in his office with Joseph Smith, and he's watching the events of the day, and he's making notes in the Clayton 3-volume set of journals, and that's where they're at.
Yes.
Where historians say that's naive, that's not how it happened. He's got a spiral, little tiny, again, that's not what it is back then, but for modern day purposes, he's got a little tiny spiral notebook in his pocket, and as things are happening, he's making notes in his notebook. And then what historians in Mormonism are saying is that he goes back to his home or back to his office, and now he's transferring these notes when he has time to a more thorough writing down in the 4-volume set of the journals. Exactly. And the argument you're making is that, hey guys, you're missing a ton of evidence. If you knew this evidence, it would lead you to draw the conclusion that that's not what's happening either, that he's making notes in his notepad in his pocket, and then 3, 4, 5, 6 years later, he's transferring these notes over to the 3-volume set of journals and manipulating the stories to reflect a narrative that Brigham Young in the church wants to exist and go forward, explaining how the church is and does what it does.
I don't make that argument about Brigham Young having any involvement in the way he wrote his journals. None whatsoever. However, the question about the original recording, we have a pattern from Clayton that he keeps consistently. In Manchester and winter quarters, also in 1847 and 53, he keeps a small pocket diary, pencil diary.
Daybook. Can we call it? It's a daybook, right?
Well, okay, so we use the term daybook, diary, journal can all be used interchangeably. The question is, what do we mean by it? You can have a daybook.
I mean a small kind of thing that you put notes in during the day and from which you use to expand later on.
Sometimes. The Manchester diary was not used to expand into anything, neither was the winter quarters. Those were complete records, but they have sparse recordings. Okay, they're truncated, they're abbreviated. Sometimes they'll flesh out a lot of stuff in a single day and write for 5 pages. And other times it's just 8B with S, meaning ate breakfast with Sarah, and so that's a sparse, intimate diary, and it's in that diary that we get all this detail about what Clayton's doing in England.
All right, Jeremy, I know that Bill wants to proceed. I've got to say something though, okay? And this is not so much a critique as an observation, all right? What you've talked about is the process of, and I think Wilford Woodruff did this. I think a lot of people did that. They had a day book, just make little notes as you go along. Then later on at night or the next night or whenever, right? You can put it in your more formal diary.
Yeah.
Got it. But, and this is very common, okay? Very common. The problem I have with conspiracy theories, which I do consider this to be, all right. And I'm not calling you a conspiracy theorist. I just think it's a conspiracy theory. And I think one of the indicia of a conspiracy theories is to take something that's very natural, very normal, very common, like this process, and then sinisterize it by saying, we don't know when it was written. It could have been written that night, the next night, which would have been the normal freaking course. I think we can all understand. Or it could have been dun, 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 years later. And what is he putting in those gaps now? Why it's dun, dun, dun. All this polygamy that he is wanting to retrofit and blame Joseph Smith for, because that is the theory, right?
That's not the theory. No, that's not my theory.
Well, then why did he put polygamy in the journals?
Why did he put that in the journals? I think he has personal motivation. Look, that's a long conversation about Clayton's state in 1854.
Okay,
and we got to go step by step. And the first step is, and you're correct. This pioneer journal, he kept concurrently a small diary, an intimate diary, and the journal simultaneously. He did the same thing.
My objection is to how you're trying to make something absolutely normal and ordinary sinister.
I'm not trying to make it sinister at all.
Well, you're trying to make it evidentiarily weighty in your favor.
What I'm doing is I'm analyzing the evidence of the journals, and the question is, can the interpretation, the assumption, follow me here. He writes an original and he expands that into the formal. We don't know the time distance. We can make an assumption. That's happening within days or a week.
Wouldn't that be the normal course?
Could be.
No, because it is, isn't it?
He also had records that he expanded or attempted to expand years later.
I'm not talking the always course, the universal course. I'm talking about the normal course. Don't you agree? That would be the normal course.
It could be. He didn't do that with Manchester.
Could be. It doesn't cut it for me. It's obviously the normal course to me. I think I understand why you need it to be could be.
No,
but
let me give you an example. Heber Kimball didn't do that. So Heber
Kimball,
give
examples that'll break it. I'm not saying he always did it. What I'm saying it is more normal course.
There's lots of examples like
me on this indicates your bias.
No, there's lots of examples of an early record, like Heber Kimball would keep an early record, and later, much later, in fact, in 1847, he repurposes his earlier journals into a formal journal.
I'm not arguing the exceptions. You're arguing the exceptions. I'm going to be quiet here. I'm going to be quiet, Bill, because I think I'm getting in the way. I'm going to apologize to you, Jeremy, and to Bill and to the audience. I'll be quiet here and let Bill go forward because he's got a certain thing he wants to get through.
Yeah. So let me just say it this way. The crux of the issue is that we have to demonstrate, again, the generally accepted position based on what seems like is happening and how we would expect it to happen is that the notes in the daybook are transferred over to the 3-volume set fairly quickly and fairly accurately. And the crux of your position rests on demonstrating that there has to be a gap of time much larger than any generally accepted historian's position allows for. And so I would like to give you a moment, if you can sort of avoid all the side stuff and demonstrate something that says, ooh, yes, that clearly shows that the best interpretation of the data is that we should go against all the accepted general position and now move towards making room that maybe these were put into the journals 4, 5, 6, 1854 you mentioned 10 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the answer to that is a fabric of evidence between the anomalous construction of the journals, their very strange construction that Robin Jensen says is inexplicable, to what Clayton did with the journals, okay, and the purpose and audience that is clear in reading it about what he's writing, his audience for whom he's writing. He will often write a record for an external audience, okay? This is a very different record in terms of its purpose and audience than his Manchester Diary. Let me start here. He permanently donates his personal record to the church, okay? So the question is why? Why would he permanently donate that original record? If you have an original that you've maintained, then it would not be a problem to donate a copy. And we know he kept an original, something original, whether it was notes on a scrap piece of paper or in a small little day book. He kept the original record, and he felt comfortable giving the formal journal to the church. No other figure that whose journals were used by the historians did this. Wilford Woodruff did not do that. His journals were not donated until his death. Parley Pratt did not. Heber Kimball did not. Those journals were used by church historians to construct the history, but their journals were not donated until after. So that's anomalous. So why would he do that? That raises a question. The historians treated the journal very differently from any other record that we have record of, any personal record. They edited his journal. They actually went in and literally, you can see on the 57 available pages we have from the Joseph Smith papers, they would strike out parts and change the language, and sometimes would make marginalia notes, and at times would write, there's a phrase in there, kicked Josiah Butterfield, that has nothing to do with what Clayton wrote, but appears to be Willard Richards writing a notation for himself to include in the history. That phrase ends up in the history. They treated Clayton's journal like it was a draft, like it was working draft material for composing the history. And so the permanent donation and the way that the historians used it is highly curious. They didn't do this with any other record. By itself, is that enough? However, no. However, we ought to consider that. The fact that he writes in Journal A, 81% of the material is dedicated to writing about Joseph Smith in polished, highly elevated prose that's very different from his other records. In those records, his personal voice recedes, and he's almost narrating Joseph Smith's story. In his own, when he's writing about himself, he reverts back to, you know, the stuff about daily life, Margaret and that, this and that. It's more truncated, more like his other diaries. But when he's writing about Joseph, the accounts become fleshed out and long and etc. If you take a record that he wrote called the Book of the Law of the Lord, that record was kept from June of 1842 to December of 1842, and Clayton kept that record. There are 3 weeks of overlapping entries between the Book of the Law of the Lord and Journal A. If you compare those entries, you remove the personal pronouns, you wouldn't know which entry, which account is which. It is almost as if, and I argue it is, as if Clayton is continuing the record that he kept for Joseph Smith in 1842. Interestingly enough, in the Book of the Law of the Lord, there's a whole sequence where he's in a legal battle, and 4 official correspondences, an affidavit and several letters, one from the U.S. Attorney General and a couple governors, are copied into the Book of the Law of the Lord. Interestingly, Clayton includes those 4 letters into his personal journal and a couple other correspondences that he does not include in the Book of the Law of the Lord, but he includes those in his journal. The question is why? We argue that he does that because he's writing this for Willard Richards to give him material. There's nothing nefarious about that. He's simply providing his journal to help Willard Richards tell Joseph Smith's story in Journal A. Okay. He also puts navigational aids and navigational notes within his own record. The question is, did he do it for himself or for an external audience? The navigational notes indicate that he's writing for the historians to help them understand where he's got certain things. You'll see July 4th, see page 82, commenced from Journal 1, see other book 2. He puts archival spine labels on the journals. He doesn't do that with his other records, but these ones he does, so that they can be archived and found easily. There is substantial material within the journals themselves that indicate that he's not writing specifically only for himself, but he's writing for an external audience.
Jeremy, I had sworn myself to secrecy, or excuse me, at least silence.
Yeah,
you know how I am at keeping those vows. Anyway, Chris Barker has a question that's been raised in the live chat, and I just wanted to pose it to you. RFM, ask him the question about the 1838 account of the first vision. Ask Jeremy if Jeremy would reject the 1838 account of the first vision because it was written 18 years later, and should we accept the 1832?
I think we should always look at accounts that are written later for what they are. They're written later, and so we have to ask ourselves, are they consistent with other parts of stories that we tell, and do things change and evolve over time?
It is inconsistent, and it did change and evolve. So
I understand your argument. I get it, and I'm not going to argue against you guys about first vision accounts.
Well, no, he's pointing out the hypocrisy, or at least the double standard that you're employing in saying that old William Clayton journals are less reliable than early Clayton journals.
They're not necessarily. An old journal can be perfectly reliable.
It's only where it talks about polygamy, isn't it?
Well, we'll get there.
In other words, every place that polygamy is there, that's the stuff that got added.
When you have a contradiction in the record, right? When you have one source that contradicts another, you have to figure out how to resolve that contradiction. Okay. And your
contradictions always involve polygamy. That's what I'm wondering.
Well, that's my area of study, yes, and I find many contradictions when it comes to those things. Let me address that. Let's talk about contradictions.
Okay, thank you for answering the question.
Let me say something though before we go on. Sure. So one thing we're talking about, one of the things that seems peculiar to you is who donates their personal records to the church and who doesn't, or what records get donated and which ones get held on to. Yeah. And I'm just, again, feel free to correct me, but I'm wondering if I'm at least right on some of these. Didn't George D. Watt donate his journals to the church historian's office? Didn't Wilford Woodruff donate during his lifetime to the church?
Wilford Woodruff donated his after he died.
Okay, what about the family did? Do we know about George D. Watt? I'm thinking, I know like there was a battle over like Leonard Arrington stuff, and at the time when I was seeing that being discussed, that the family was doing it one way and donating it to a university, and and there were rules about what happens when that person dies, and the church wanted to hang on to them. I come across a bunch of research about like who had their journals with the church and who didn't. And I'll just note, I don't think it's an all or nothing, with the exception of Clayton.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Yes.
I don't think it's impossible for someone to donate their personal diaries. It's just highly anomalous. It's not something that was done during the construction of the church history. That is something we don't have record of.
But anomalies happen.
Sure.
And anomalies, you can line up a bunch of anomalies, and they can just be anomalies. You know, the other one you talk about, putting the protective spine protection on the book, and like, oh, he did it on this one. So it's like he had this wherewithal of how it was going to be used. And so
sure,
it's a sign that it's intentional. And I'm thinking back over the course of my life and how many times I took the hole protectors and put them on certain things I did in college and other things I didn't. And if somebody came along later and said, well, let's make something about the ones he put the hole protectors on and the ones that he didn't, when really there's no rhyme or reason to that, other than for whatever reason I thought about it at the time and I did it.
Yep.
So far, these don't sway me at all. And I'm wondering, again, no offense, I keep waiting for like this. When I do episodes on history,
evidence is the word you're looking for, Bill. Evidence.
Yeah,
you're looking
when
for
I put evidence up on the screen, I think I'm drawing really strong connections to the audience, where the audience watches our Mormonism Live episodes about these things, looks at the screen and goes, there's no doubt this is what's going on with this, or this is what's going on with that. And I feel like it's death by 1,000 cuts, but none of the cuts are significant. And so I'm hoping we can put something up that is significant enough that
if you're asking for something that Clayton says, I wrote this in 1845.
No, there should there should be some evidence that clearly shows that these journals were written late, and the things you're presenting don't move me. And to be honest, they don't move the general audience. There's a segment of people, certainly it's convincing for, and people get to decide what's true or what isn't. I'm not debating what's true or what isn't. Who really can know, right? If Joseph saw a heavenly being or two heavenly beings in a grove, we can only make the argument based on what evidence has the best evidentiary value, what has the most value at swaying us to think something. And I'm just wondering if there's something that you've got that says, like, you would put it up on the screen and I would go, yeah, how could you argue that these aren't late? And I'm wondering if that exists.
So ask yourself the following: why does he write Journal A, stop right in the middle of, well, not the middle, the first third of Journal A, move to Journal B, go backward 4 days? Then when he's finished with Journal B, he calls Journal B Journal 1. Then he goes back to Journal A, calls Journal A at the continuation of the entry from Journal A B back in Journal A. He calls that Book 2. Why does he do that? Can you explain?
There's only one explanation for that, Jeremy, and that is that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy, but William Clayton's trying to frame it for it. That's the only explanation for that.
Yeah, I did the same thing in school, Jeremy. Like I had notebooks for different classes, and I bought them all at the same time. I'm going to different classes, and suddenly I realize I'm making my math notes in my biology notebook. I think that it doesn't need to be nefarious.
It's not nefarious.
Yeah, okay.
The construction of the journals is not nefarious.
It is nefarious if polygamy didn't happen under Joseph Smith's stewardship and William Clayton's putting it in the journals.
Certainly. If he's putting it at 100%, if he's doing that at a certain point, what I'm talking about is the way he constructs the journals is not nefarious. The way he constructs the journals, you have to be, look, if you're going to consider this a daily record, you got to ask yourself why. What we would expect is he's keeping Journal A from November 27, 1842 to April 28, 1843. He jumps to another book. If he's doing it contemporaneously, why does he go backward 4 days? Okay, that's number one.
Dan Vogel suggests it's because he started to write about polygamy and switched to a new journal. What do you think of that?
Except that he writes about polygamy and the other ones as well. So that doesn't work. Okay, the polygamy stuff for Clayton is throughout, and so that's a nice suggestion, but that doesn't hold water.
Well, doesn't that very fact undermine your complete theory that the middle one was only to pin Joseph Smith with polygamy? If there's polygamy,
no, that's not why he did it.
Journal,
that's not my theory for why he did it. No.
Well, why did he do it?
Why did he create the Gap book?
I thought the whole point of the polygamy denier, monogamy affirmer movement was to say that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy and that this was a construct that was created after the fact by people who did want to practice polygamy and who were in fact practicing polygamy behind Joseph Smith's back while he was alive. And then they wanted to rewrite it back into the history with Joseph Smith to give it legitimacy. Is that not what your theory is?
That's part of it, but it's not as simple as Clayton created a Gap book to pin polygamy on Joseph Smith. That's not why he created the Gap book. It's not why he created that second record.
Does it have anything to do with polygamy?
Those entries, yes.
No,
but that wasn't the
motivation of the Gap journal. Does the creation of the Gap journal have anything to do with polygamy in your view?
I don't believe the starting of it. No, not at all. No, I don't believe that he created that specifically for that purpose. I believe that he was creating the record specifically to help church historians tell Joseph Smith's history. That's the reason why I believe he created this whole record. So,
and to tell it accurately?
I think for the most part, yeah.
Including the polygamy that Joseph Smith practiced?
No, I don't believe so. Just like I don't believe William McClellan was accurate in his statements about his conversation with Emma Smith.
I know you jump to other things, but I'm just
talking about I'm drawing a parallel between something that's recorded. Can we trust that statement?
Well, what? Okay, but you're assuming you can't trust somebody else. So in other words, this person that you don't want to trust about polygamy, it's okay to not trust them because you don't trust what somebody else said about polygamy.
Well, okay, so the entire question you're asking is about the reliability of any particular statement by anybody, right? So whether or not
the question I'm asking you is the general understanding that I thought people who believe that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy was that this Gap journal was created in order to hide Joseph Smith's polygamy, in order to actually have the Gap journal was then created later after the fact in order to interpose polygamy on the past. That's what I thought your position was.
I don't know why Clayton created those individual entries. Why? I don't know. I have a theory, but it's just a theory. It's a speculation about why
individual entries about polygamy.
Yeah, about the dozen entries that have to do with explicit conversations with Joseph Smith. The stuff with
in the Gap journal or throughout.
They're only in the Gap journal. Okay. There are no explicit entries anywhere else.
So what's your theory then for why it is now polygamy is mentioned outside the Gap journal, but you're specifically defining it as conversations with Joseph Smith about polygamy that are only in the Gap journal?
They're only there. That's the only place they exist between Clayton and Joseph Smith. No, that's discernible because the only entries that have to do with that are in that volume.
I'm sorry. I said and your theory, not in your theory. Oh, I apologize. And I wanted to know what your theory was from that, taking it for granted that you're correct.
So I'm going to enter the realm of speculation. This is just speculation. None of us can know why Clayton wrote what he wrote. Okay, unless he's being perfectly honest. That's one. He can be perfectly honest, and that's where your assumptions lie. And on my side, there's a contradiction between what he writes, for example, and what Emily Partridge writes. There's a contradiction between him and Joseph Smith. So how do we choose? Clayton in his life, I believe he's not writing these things till 1854, and our book establishes. Oh, well, go ahead.
Here's what I'm going to do, Jeremy. I'm getting the look from Bill, and I apologize because I'm really going to mute myself again. Here's the thing, though. What you're talking about is these wrinkles in history. Okay, well, he disagrees. William Clayton disagrees with what one of the Partridge sisters says, and maybe they disagree with what somebody else said. These are the wrinkles in history. The overall agreement is that there was a plural marriage that took place, and you're trying to look at the little wrinkles.
Do the details
the wrinkles like they're the history, and they're not history like it's the wrinkles.
They're not wrinkles. And let me give you a very 20-second overview as to why.
And I'm not going to interrupt, and I'll let you go on from there. I'm muting myself now on purpose. Promise.
So ask yourself if this matters. On August 16th, 1843, Clayton writes that Emma gives Joseph permission to take E and EP. That's assumed that it's Emily and Eliza Partridge, okay? This is the first conversation, apparently, that Joseph has with them, and it's going to be after that sometime that some marriage occurs or something of that nature. Emily and Eliza Partridge testify in multiple accounts that they had 2 marriages to Joseph Smith, March 4th and May 11th, okay, of 1843. But the problem is, Emily and Eliza say that Emma gave them under of her full and free consent on May 11th with Judge James Adams as the officiator. The problem with that account is Judge Adams is dead by August 11th, and Emma is not in town on May 11th, nor is Judge Adams, and that comes out in the Temple Lot case. Their stories don't add up with the contemporaneous record, nor do they add up with Clayton. So the question is Clayton's supposedly contemporaneous record correct, or are they correct? Or are they both wrong? Well, only one can be correct or sort of correct, but they can't both be correct. Okay.
But it doesn't make the entire event non-existent, is all I'm saying. And then I unmuted myself. I'm sorry. I'm a liar. Go ahead.
They're mutually exclusive, but both can be wrong. And the question is, how do you resolve something like that? That's just one example.
Well, whether the light at the intersection was green or whether it was red doesn't change the fact that there was a collision.
What changes the fact is you have stories that start in 1869. You have Emily Partridge, who internally in her own stories, she contradicts herself between about 5 different accounts. Okay. So the question is, can we rely on Emily Partridge's story? She's the only woman ever to say that she had sex with Joseph Smith. The only one. Okay. She was asked in 1892. The question is that story reliable or not?
You're taking right? the later affidavits where they're being, yes, a tiny bit ambiguous in terms of they're not just saying like, I effed Joseph's in the back room. They're using ambiguous language, but it's clear that they're articulating like, no, I was really with him.
2 women, just 2. Tell me the other ones. It's Melissa Lott and Emily Partridge. There's no other women who make that claim. None.
Okay. So, but you said she was the only one. And so now we're saying there's 2 women.
Melissa Lott insinuates it. Emily Partridge is explicit. Melissa Lott says, I lived with him in an affidavit to clarify the 1892 testimony. She says, I was a wife in very deed. Okay. So that's an insinuation. It's not explicit, but insinuation is clear. The question is what she's saying reliable? There are no other people who say it.
Well, let's pause for a moment there.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe with sex, we'll get to some of this in a minute, but let's take, for instance, Lucy Walker's firsthand account of her experience. She's deeply describing somebody practicing predatory behavior. It's, she's naming Joseph Smith. Brian Hale says sex happened, but let's throw that off the table. It's not that you.
No, Brian does not say that sex happened with Lucy Walker.
Well, I thought he did, but
no, he says it's possible. He doesn't say it happened.
Yeah. Well, my experience is when church apologists say something's possible, it's usually when it's happened. I'll just note the polygamy deniers don't just need the sex not to be there. They also need Joseph not to practice predatory behaviors and not to give people, not to practice religious coercion and give people time constraints. And so Lucy Walker is describing an experience that the polygamy deniers would want to get away from as far as possible, just as much as the sex.
So you're in a realm of motivation, motivated reasoning and arguments. You can believe this or not, but I used to believe in and teach and advocate the polygamy doctrine. Okay, in my own head, I had a moment, I've talked about it on my show, or my mission, where I thought a woman would be my plural wife in the next world. I had no trouble with Joseph Smith doing any of those things at one point in my life. To me, what led me to the conclusions that I have come to is an analysis of the evidentiary record, to actually looking at, for example, is there really good evidence that Emma caught Joseph in the barn with Fanny? And there's not. There's William McClellan's 1872 statement, and if you want to, we can go through that. But he contradicts himself in 1847 at the very time he's supposed to have this conversation with Emma. And the question is it reliable? Is what he says in 1872 reliable given that he's the only person that ever says it. There's a problem that you have when you have something called the single source, when there's only one source that makes a claim. For example, like William McClellan, right? It's the only source. Generally, historians look to corroborate things with other records. But if you have a single source, how do you corroborate that? Well, you have to look to the witness himself and the surrounding context and anything else that might be in the record that could potentially falsify what he's saying. And we have that time and time and time again with many of these records. Emily Partridge being one, Lucy Walker being another, Melissa Lott being another, William McClellan being another. I mentioned this to you before. If you want to have a true, not just a 2-hour, let's go back and forth and ping pong back and forth. If you want to have a real discussion about documents, what they say, what they don't say, I put it on the table to you before. I'm willing to come on with Michelle Stone, with anybody you want to bring onto the show. Bring Dan Vogel, bring Mark Tensmeyer, bring Brian Hales, and we'll have a long-form discussion about these things.
Jeremy,
because
I would like it if you just brought some evidence. If you just brought some evidence, it would be great. I haven't seen any.
Agreed. So when I turn time over, again, we've had conversation before this started, and my hope was that like you would put the best evidence forward, and the things that we've chatted about so far, it's like we would have to string along 1,000 things and then go like, okay, maybe. And I want to set this down for a minute because there are other things I want to chat about. And I feel like if we just keep going, it's going to be this, which is you pointing out these small little anomalies. And in the end, they're supposed to add up to something. And so far, I don't see it. And I think the majority of people don't see it. And so again, I don't mean any offense. I'd be happy to have you back on, but my fear is that it would go just like this goes, where you share something and the other side of, which is a much bigger side. And again, it doesn't mean the majority's right and the minority's wrong, but there is a generally accepted perspective. And for all intents and purposes, the most generally accepted position is the most rational position of that moment, that it is convincing to the most people and they're swayed by the evidence in a certain direction. It's not that the other side is wrong. It's that currently the most rational position, I think, is the generally accepted position. And your argument is if we put a bunch of things together, like maybe it opens the door for something else to be believed. And so I want to, again, I mean, no offense. I just feel like we're going to spend another hour doing more of the same. And I want to get to some things that have some more substance to them. So we had talked before this conversation about the Kinderhook plates, and you had offered a possibility for how William Clayton's journal happens to have a Kinderhook plate etching on it, the outline. And I don't know if you have that video. I'm happy to play it if you do.
Yeah, I do.
And again, I'd be happy to have you back on. We could do, again, if RFM wants to do it, we can do a Mormonism Live. If he doesn't, I can do a Mormon discussion. But I just feel like we'll get constantly bogged down because I'm not informed enough to tackle these problems on my own. So if I had RFM or if I had Dan Vogel, the two of them are going to interrupt constantly because they don't agree with the position you take. They don't agree with how you interpret the evidence. And I think most importantly, they don't agree to the weight that you place on anomalies that the majority of the folks studying this material don't place on them. And so it gets difficult. So anyway, let's go to the video of this, if you've got it, and let people see how you would deal with why this etching of the Kinderhook plate is on this journal.
Trying to share my screen one more time. Oh, why am I?
You should be able to, if you shared a window, you should be able to overlap that video on top of the one you're currently using. If you used a tab, you might have to remove your current tab and put a new tab up.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, I by the way, to the audience, I promised Jeremy we wouldn't get into some conflict debate. This topic is, I think, naturally going to create that almost every time because there's so much at stake. For you guys, it's like Joseph Smith's integrity. And for my side, I feel like the polygamy deniers have an emotional position that it's so important to hang on to, and yet what really stops them from deconstructing all of it is if Joseph Smith turns out to be a polygamist. And so both sides feel like they really want the truth out because they feel like it benefits mankind to be able to convey that. And so there's a lot of emotion at stake. But I'll try, and Arfim, I'll ask you if we can just try to sort of give him a little more room to say what he's saying. We definitely want to offer pushback, but if we can do it in a way that gives him less contention, I think that's great.
I'm trying to share my screen, and for whatever reason, I may be a troglodyte.
Well, let me just say it, which is you sent me a video. It's like 16 seconds long, and it shows you.
I'd rather show it because that showing and telling is two different things, and I think this really conveys the point.
While you're working on that,
do you need to stop sharing yours for me to share mine or not?
No. You should be able to put it down there, and if it shows up, I can add it to the screen. By the way,
there we go. Sorry.
No worries.
It's there. It's there now. Yeah, it's there.
Okay. Why won't it let me? Before presenting, remove the other media. Remove. Try that.
So the question with the Kinderhook plate, it's been used as a smoking gun to say this proves he did this May 1st to May 3rd. To consider something proof, incontrovertible, that has to be the only way you can do it. Okay? If you can do it reasonably in another fashion, the question is there another way that Clayton could have transferred that image reasonably, simply, and easily using another method? And the answer is, of course.
But the reason is to try and make it look older than it really is, correct?
No, the reason is just to make a nice, faithful copy in some way, form, or fashion of the original. That's all. To transfer what he had done in the original. Or perhaps he wrote it on a scrap of paper. Who knows? It's not possible to know. But remember, there's some things to understand about this. First of all, there wasn't the original text. Okay, his pattern was to write an original and then to transfer it. Most likely, his method of keeping the original was to keep his daily diary like he did in Manchester. Stenciling was ubiquitous and extremely common in the 1840s. That was the standard method of transferring images from one medium to another, decorating walls, etc. All you need is scissors and paper. And a master's thesis about this that we quote in the book, people stenciling would grab for any kind of paper they could find, and they would make stencils out of those. The evidence within the journal indicates that most likely his original record was something like a pocket daybook, just like Brigham Young had, and Brigham Young created a tracing very similar to that. And then the final thing, this is interesting, I don't know if it's definitive, but the ink bleed on the tracing itself is inward. It slants inward, which may indicate that he was indeed tracing on the inside of something just like I did. That's not definitive, but that shows that it's very possible that he could have done exactly what I just did.
I disagree. So anytime I've traced things with ink, an ink pen, something laying on a paper, I'm trying to get sort of at that edge.
Yeah.
I've had plenty of times where I've sent ink more on the inside than I wanted, preferred rather than the outside that I wanted.
That's why I say it's not definitive, but it may suggest that he was tracing on the inside of something. That's all I'm saying, is that it's possible.
Yeah, my pushback here is that, again, the most reasonable way to understand what happened is that the Kinderhook plate was placed on top of the page and it was traced. And you're positing that there's this less than most reasonable way. So it's possible. And you're offering that as a possibility for how it happened. So I agree with you. That is one way to accomplish the same thing. It occurs to me that it seems like it would be the less likely way to do it.
No, I understand. It's not whether or not he did it this way. I'm not arguing he did it this way. I'm only showing that the Kinderhook plate has been called a smoking gun.
But if he didn't do it this way, are you admitting that he had the actual Kinderhook plate with him to trace?
100%. Yeah, on the day that he did it, in whatever form he did it. So just like Brigham Young traced it in pencil or whatever on that day, Clayton did it as well.
So you're saying that this was after Joseph Smith died, according to your theory?
No, it was May 1st through May 3rd. He would only have had access.
No, the cutout in the second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. my argument is that he does that in the Gap book later, at some point later. Correct.
Without the actual plate.
Correct.
Because
Correct.
those were given back to
correct. They were
right?
They were only there till the 3rd. It may have come back sometime, I think, in June, but Clayton would not have had access to them.
So the reason this is devastating to your theory is that if it is what it appears to be, which is a tracing of the freaking Kinderhook plate right there in the middle of the journal with writing around it, and it's in the page somewhere in the middle. It's not the beginning or the end. That's why that is a smoking gun, showing contemporaneousness of the journal entry with the Kinderhook plate possession by Joseph Smith, which was only for a few days in 1843, correct?
So let's assume that he traced it onto a piece of paper.
But you agree with me, that's what makes it a smoking gun, correct?
No, it's not a smoking gun, because if
he had the actual plate, if it is a tracing of the actual plate, it would be a smoking gun.
If he took that page and put it under the plate on that day, of course. But the question is, could he have written it on a piece of paper and transferred it into that journal within days or a week, even?
The trouble,
had he wanted to.
Yeah, the trouble with that, Jeremy, is that the way rational thinking works is that we pick the conclusion that requires the least amount of conjecture and allowances. And what you're doing is saying, if we give some allowances, that there's original Kinderhook plate some other place, and now we allow the allowance that he cuts it out, and now we have the allowance that he traces it back in, and so now we're 3 allowances in just on this one situation.
So let's take another piece of data that I'd ask you guys to explain. So on April 28th, so we're dealing with dates in the book, and let's go to this picture so you can see it, because it'll help you see it. In book 1, he stops writing book 1 on April 28th, 1843. Okay, this is a few days before the Kinderhook tracing. Okay, he then supposedly, if he's doing it contemporaneously, writes that entry 28th, 29th, 30th, and on the 1st. So 4 to 5 days later. Okay, 4 to 5 days later, and now he's tracing it in the journal. Why does he go backward? If he's doing this contemporaneously, why does he go backward in the 2nd volume? Why does he take his marriage entry explicitly in the 1st volume, then write it cryptically in the 2nd volume, very terse shorthand? And why does he go backward? What would explain in your minds going backward 4 days when we would expect him to continue where he left off? If he's doing
only one explanation. There's only one explanation, and that is that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy.
What's your explanation?
That's it.
Of why he would go backward. I'm asking you a question.
Yeah.
If there's any other explanation, it's irrelevant to your whole case, right?
We're gonna run into the same thing. So you're saying there's an anomaly, and
there's a long list of them. That's the point. The long list has to be accounted for. So when you're dealing with an explanation of a phenomenon, you can use parsimony, or the principle of Occam's razor, which is oftentimes bastardized to claim that it's the simplest explanation is the best. The explanation that's preferred when you have multiple explanations to explain a piece of phenomena is the one that accounts for all of the evidence while requiring the fewest unsupported assumptions.
Yeah.
The problem is this long list of evidence struggles when you try to assume it was done at the time. And so the question I have for that particular piece of evidence, why would he go backward 4 days?
Yeah, I look at like the 1832 letter book of Joseph Smith and how it gets turned upside down and used for different things. I think there are anomalies.
And why would you jump from one book to the next and go backward? Let's just stick to that. Okay. Then what
difference does it make if it doesn't prove that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy? Okay. Are you just trying to say there's anomalies out there?
He jumps from one book to the next. He goes backward 4 days. He calls the 2nd volume, volume 2. He calls the 1st book, 2nd volume, volume 1. He calls the 1st book, volume 2. Do you have answers for why he does these weird things? It's just weird. It's just
you don't have to. That's the first thing I want to say. We don't have to have an answer for every anomaly. And in fact, sometimes the human brain wanting to find answers to things can lead them to incorrect answers.
Source criticism requires that you figure out, when you don't know when pen hits paper, that you do your best to figure out why a record is the way it is. Okay.
And I guess John Turner does not understand source criticism as well as you.
No, my supposition is John Turner didn't spend a ton of time dealing with these issues.
And you think you could convince him?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
Have you convinced Dan Vogel?
No, I don't think I will convince Dan Vogel of anything.
Have you convinced me?
No, I don't think I will convince you of anything.
Well, if you had some evidence, you might have a chance, Jeremy. That's all I'm saying. You have no evidence.
I don't think I would convince you of anything. I think you have a position and I have a position.
I'm shutting up.
And we both argue those positions.
Shutting up.
I want to take the way you just framed this part of the conversation, because this will apply perfectly in this next piece. So let me take this down.
Yeah.
You put this up. This is where I'm going to ask you about these land deeds. So I went back into 1842 to 1844 because I wasn't even researching. I wasn't trying to come up with this. We were doing another episode on Flora Woodworth, one of the alleged plural wives of Joseph Smith, and I found her land deed. And as I found her land deed, I found 2 or 3 other land deeds, and I thought, wait a minute, that's a plural wife, and that's a plural wife, and that's a plural wife. So from 1842 till Joseph Smith's death, we find, let's say we find 30, 35 land deeds. Of those, some of those are a land deed to Emma, not the unencumbered lots one. We'll get to that in a minute, but just a normal land deed to Emma. One's to Hiram's first wife. So those ones I just got rid of. There were some women that were alleged sort of to be a wife of Joseph Smith, but the evidence was super weak. I cast those off to the side. I only hung on to the deeds where a woman got land without any co-grantee man. And of those 30 deeds, again, 5 of them got cast off. There were 25 deeds left, and 13 of them were to plural wives of Joseph Smith. Again, 35 women, about 34, 33 women have been alleged to be plural wives of Joseph Smith. If we give out deeds in Nauvoo to a large population, again, some of the estimates are 10 to 12,000 people. We have to reduce it. Only so many of those are female. Only so many of those are adult. Only so many of those are believing Mormon. You can pick the number, by the way. You can pick how many potential plural wives there are, and you can pick what the population of adult Mormon women are in Nauvoo. I'll let you do that. When you get done, to give out 25 land deeds and to have 13 of them be to alleged plural wives of Joseph Smith, it strikes me as astronomically impossible to strike up to coincidence. Do you agree with that part, that it's not coincidence?
I don't. First of all, I'm not a statistician, and neither are you.
Yeah.
And I would argue on the grounds of, I think statistics is probably not the model to use when we're not statisticians. I would simply refer people to watch Michelle Stone's episode on this, go through her argument, go through Bill's, and ask yourself.
Is Michelle a statistician? Is Michelle a statistician?
She brought a statistician on the show and showed the statistician Bill's argument, and he said it was absurd.
Yeah.
And frankly, and said you're using statistics to solve a problem that can't use statistics. You're using what should be a fixed number, which is the number of wives, which is a variable, which creates confounding factors. And so, look, I'm not a statistician. I can't argue on those grounds.
I love it.
But if you can back that up with statisticians and you can have a real argument that way, I think there's maybe something.
Yeah,
you know, to say there. If you've got that, that's great. But then that's an argument for statisticians and not for me.
Perfect. Let me just run through. So, if again, people in Nauvoo are getting land, and there's deeds all over the place, but a woman getting land by herself is an anomaly. It isn't normal in society in general, and it certainly isn't normal in Nauvoo. When we look at the 25 deeds that were given to women alone, 13 of them, more than 50%, are to alleged plural wives of Joseph Smith. And we're to believe there's no relationship to polygamy. So there's Elizabeth Davis Durfee. There's Flora Ann Woodworth. She's 16 years old. Do you find it strange that a 16-year-old is getting land?
Possibly. If there's no other context besides she's a wife.
No. Forget your conclusion. She's not married other than Joseph Smith. Forget your conclusion. Does a 16-year-old child getting land seem strange to you?
Not necessarily.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Flora Ann Woodworth, 16.
He gave land to the Partridge children.
Helen Mar Kimball is 14 years old. Mm-hmm. Is that strange that she's getting land? Miranda Nancy Johnson gets it. Elizabeth Rawlings Leitner gets it. Patty Bartlett Sessions gets land. Sarah Ann Whitney gets land. Sarah Scott Mulholland gets land. Sylvia Sessions gets land. And then we get to this unencumbered lots one from Emma Smith, where it matches the Clayton journal perfectly. Clayton says Emma's pissed. Joseph's trying to resolve her being pissed. And he's like, man, how do we shut this woman up? Again, this is the generally accepted historian's position. How do we shut this woman up? And Joseph says, give her all the encumbered lots of Nauvoo. And then what we find is that she gets a deed of all the encumbered lots in Nauvoo. Isn't the most reasonable explanation that the Clayton journals are representing what's happening accurately in this instance?
If your presumption and your model for predicting that he's only giving deeds to wives is correct, and you seem convinced that it is.
No. Wait a minute. He's only giving deeds to his wives? No. He's
proving evidence of him giving land to that there's a correlation between wives and deeds.
No. If you're playing poker and you get aces and kings along with other things, but you get a lot of aces and kings all the time, hand after hand. You get other things too, but you're constantly winning and you're constantly getting good cards. We all start to go, something fishy is happening there. Now,
you're assuming that the wives number is fixed.
No. I'm only going off of the list of the 33 to 35 that the historians have posited. I'm not going and finding other women. If I take, again, I know you want to push against this, but if I have 1,000 marbles in a jar and 950 are white and 50 are black, but they're in the jar randomly, at what point, I guess I'm pulling some white ones out, but at what point is it so saturated with black marbles that it's astronomical that it's coincidence? And there's math that shows this. So in the problem I just gave, I think it's somewhere like in 1 in 200 million that after 25 marbles, I would have 13 black along with my 12 white ones. And so, yes, John Kidd is a professor at UVU. He's a mathematician. He sits down with Michelle Stone and he basically discredits, says this sort of math cannot be used to draw a conclusion about what the reason is. Now, I'll just note here that I've been in conversation with John Kidd the last couple of days. And there's a couple of things that people need to know about John Kidd. John Kidd says, I think it is fair to say that coincidence or chance is unlikely to be the best explanation for the distribution of land deeds. And he goes on and he says, it can be lots of things, but it's something. It's not coincidence. It's something. He says, I also generally believe that results we see are unlikely to occur due to chance. By saying that the land deed distributions were unlikely to be just random selection seems a very obvious selection and something I would have expected without hearing the numbers. In other words, no matter what, he thinks there's reasons behind why people get land and why they don't. It can be socioeconomic status. It can be proximity to those who have influence over land. It can be 1,000 reasons. But you just explained in the last segment that we as historians need to pick the conclusion that has the best evidentiary value at explaining what's going on. He also says, so if there were Reader's Digest version to my somewhat of a ramble above, can one say that coincidence is unlikely to be the reason? Yes. Can one say for sure or even moderately confidently what the reasons are? I don't think so. Okay.
So what's his conclusion?
What's that?
Is his conclusion that the obvious answer is that there's a correlation between wives?
No, the conclusion is that John Kidd is biased, and I'll show that. He has an interest in this discussion. He didn't just come to the conversation with Michelle because he's a statistician or a mathematician. He came to the conversation as a polygamy denier. And you asked me on the phone the other day, am I accusing John Kidd of being a polygamy denier? No, John Kidd's going to go ahead and do that for me. So when I get to the second email, He says, I cannot weigh in on the approach of historians, because I asked him, I said, is this a difference in approach? Because historians are trying to infer what is the best explanation based on the data. And he doesn't want to touch this topic with a 10-foot pole. And I go, maybe that's just because he's a mathematician, even though you and I both know that mathematicians deal with probability and they make conclusions based on hypotheses. They're not just working with absolute certainties. But for some reason, John Kidd doesn't want to touch this topic at all. So he says, I cannot weigh in on the approach of historians to assess the most likely interpretation of history, as that is not my training. However, I would caution many across many fields to be careful of trying to use limited or potentially incorrect statistical models. My favorite statistics related quotes, and he goes on and on. If you torture data long enough, it'll confess to anything. He says, I am hesitant to give any explanation of weight because there is information we just don't know. That's true, but you and I both know that we can't base our conclusions and hold back because there's things out there that we could never know or may know at some later point. We have to draw the best conclusion in this moment based on what best explains the evidence with the least amount of conjecture and allowances. And we do this all the time in history, and we do it in math too, but we do it all the time in history. And what Kidd is doing, by the way, I noted right about this moment, I'm like, oh, he's not just a mathematician in this conversation. He has an interest, and I'll get to the bottom of it. He says, I'm hesitant to give any explanation. I am hesitant to give any explanation a weight because there is information we just don't know. And I feel it's incredibly likely we will ever be able to know. But we don't hold back making decisions about our interpretations of history because there might be things, or there probably is things we don't know. There are things we don't know about those Kinderhook plates, and you just went ahead and made inferences about them. So he says that. He says, additionally, I'm very concerned about how any conclusion may be applied. Really? Why would you be hesitant of any conclusion? That's a strange position to take. So then, I think it's maybe in the next one. Let me see here if I've got it. Give me just 2 seconds.
I would add to that it might seem a strange position to take unless Professor Kidd already has a closely held opinion on the subject, that he's concerned that other people might reach conclusions different than that.
Yeah, and I'm going to put his second to last one. So I asked him, I said, are you a Mormon, and do you believe that Joseph Smith was a polygamist? And his answer to me he said right here, I'll make it a little bigger so we can see this. He says, you may ask, but I'm not going to answer in this discussion. However, some amount of that question can likely be answered by some other work I am participating in. You can view a discussion about a paper I am a part of here. This link will take you to approximately where the portion of the paper I worked on is being discussed, but please feel free to watch as much as you like. And it's Rick Bennett using John Kidd's data to show that because we have no children in Joseph Smith's polygamy, the most likely inference that can be made is that Joseph Smith isn't having sex with these women, or if he is, it's so rare that it is explainable as having no children. Don't you think that's strange that the statistician involved in polygamy denier material goes on with Michelle Stone and dismisses me making a reasonable inference? In fact, I'm going to do the same thing you did to RFM. Do you have a better explanation for why 13 of 25 land deeds are saturated with women who you say had nothing to do with polygamy with Joseph Smith? I don't have a better explanation. Do you have a better explanation for how that got in there?
You're again asking me a statistical question.
No.
I'm sorry, Bill. You're asking me a statistical question based on a model for, I don't know if you remember in college, statistics, one of the hardest classes you ever take. And your argument is to say John Kidd was motivated to say what he said. Now, I don't know, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't.
You don't know
I
that
don't
he's
know.
a polygamy denier, Jeremy? You're not aware
I
of
don't
that?
know John Kidd. I've never met him. I don't know him.
You
Okay.
you don't know at all that he's a polygamy denier. That's a no.
I've never met John Kidd.
That-
I've never spoken with him. I don't have any knowledge about that whatsoever.
Well, that's a different question. I just want to get on the record. You have no knowledge of him at all.
No, I don't. I've never spoken to him. The first time I ever heard his name was when he was on Michelle's show. I don't know anything about him other than that he's a professor at UVA.
All right. So neither one of us are statisticians, and I want to move on from this and go to other things. But like again, we can deflect if we want to, but if there is a jar, again, you can say this is a different story. It doesn't apply. That's fine. But if there's a jar of 1,000 marbles and 950 are white and 50 are black, you and I both agree that the more I pull out, there's a certain percentage that should be white and there's a certain percentage that should be black. And as I pull out a black one or two black ones, that's understandable. But the more black marbles I pull out in the first 10 marbles, first 20 marbles, first 30 marbles, it becomes at some point astronomically impossible to explain with coincidence.
Have you had an independent statistician verify your findings?
Yes, Professor John Kidd is a statistician, and he just agreed with everything Bill said. He said it's not going to happen by coincidence. There has to be a reason for these intentional selections to be made.
The question is your model for the reason accurate to the statistics?
Once we know it's not coincidence, now we can make a historical inference.
Yes.
I'm asking you to make a historical inference. What best explains the non-coincidence of 13 out of 25 land deeds?
I would first start by disputing every single one of those wives. That's the first way that I would do it, is to dispute the evidentiary basis upon which we consider them wives. And by the way,
the argument is that the people who've studied this have come up with a list that's generally accepted amongst people who believe that Joseph Smith, the historians who believe that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. It's around 33, and some would have some on and maybe a few off, but it's basically around 33 women. And the strange thing that Bill discovered is that they arrived at those names independently from looking at other records. And yet Bill's examination of the deeds in Nauvoo given by Joseph Smith, the unencumbered lots that were given to single women, some of them as young as 14, ends up having an astronomical 50% rate going to women that have, as of this time in 2026, previously been identified by legitimate historians using historical methods as being Joseph Smith's plural wives. The odds against that are astronomical. There is no more likely explanation for this conceivable than that. They were given because they were Joseph Smith's plural wives. You can posit that it's not polygamy, but it's the families that are close to Smith. Or you could posit that it's not the poor people, but the wealthy. But if you actually suggest one of those, the research would clearly show that none of those are strong enough to explain the saturation to this strength. The most obvious, by the way, the most obvious is you go, this is tied to polygamy, and it explains everything with no conjecture, no allowances, no pushback. It just solves it. Does that make sense? Like again, you can take the less than most rational answer, but that is the most rational answer.
You use the word rational as though you are the proprietor of rationality. So I would push back on you, Bill, to say, look, I'm not a statistician. I have not done a deep dive on land deeds. Michelle has. I would tell the audience, go watch Michelle, watch Bill, listen to both, decide who you agree with. I assume that some in the audience, probably most in the audience, will love Bill's argument. Others will not. The statistician did not agree with you. He agreed that it's not coincidence. He did not agree with you on your conclusions. And if you can find other statisticians who do, maybe there's a conversation there.
Yeah, well, of course he wouldn't agree with Bill on his conclusions because he was a polygamy denier too.
Okay, so you're just assigning motive to say this guy could not come to a rational conclusion based on actual science, based on that alone.
Jeremy, it's the exact same reason you can't come to the obvious and rational conclusion that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. Based on your bias, exposed to your belief in the alternative, and you're arguing from your conclusion.
Jeremy, he wouldn't be on Michelle Stone's podcast if he chose the other conclusion. Let me say this too, by the way.
Are you certain he did the work on the child stuff before he went on Michelle's show? Did he do that before he went on Michelle's show? You are making assumptions about things you don't have knowledge for.
And why is he not telling Bill why it is his position on the issue unless it's obvious what it is, Jeremy?
It's
Obviously,
obvious.
he's a polygamy
You're
denier.
very good at reading minds, RFM.
No, I'm good at reading words and
people
understanding
exactly
what
what
they
they
mean.
do.
All right, let me move on from that. So again, in each of these issues, I'm saying what is the most reasonable thing to attribute to explain it? And then I want you to just notice how often your side has to take the less than most reasonable. So I'll go here. Nauvoo High Council minutes.
Yep.
Teaching by President Hiram Smith. We don't really know what he taught, but we know he taught something.
Yep.
Then we get to the events, and after the Nauvoo High Council, certain men are asked to leave affidavits.
Yep.
Many of them, most of them are inside the LDS faction. So I'm going to agree with you. Let's just dismiss them and throw them off to the side. We end up with Austin Cowles and Leonard Sobey. Both of them expressed their distaste for polygamy. Sobey ends up aligning himself with outside factions, and somebody goes to him to get his testimony to affirm the positivity that that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And that polygamy, if so, it was good. And he took the alternate stance and says, like, you can get my testimony, but only if you represent me fairly. And I'm going to say the opposite of what you said, which is that Hiram Smith presented D&C 132. And so I'm curious how you respond to Austin Cowles and Leonard Sobey, who would be, again, most reasonable perspective generally is that those men are great witnesses because they're against polygamy.
Sure.
So I'm curious what you do with this instance.
So this would be a long conversation. Okay. So it involves RFM, your favorite, the expositor. It involves the High Council minutes. It involves multiple rumors of and conversation about various revelations on polygamy that were before and independent of the July 12th revelation. So look, you set this up in a way that no matter what I say, it doesn't matter. So if you want to have a real conversation about that issue, doing it in 2 minutes is not sufficient. However, there's a lot to be discussed on that front. Let me give you one thing about the High Council minutes. For example, William Law, January 3rd, 1844. William Law in the Nauvoo City Council meeting says that Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith both spoke against the doctrine in the High Council and in the Elders' Quorum. Okay. Just let that sink in for a second. So on January 3rd, this is sometime after this August meeting. We don't know exactly when the actual revelation was read. On January 3rd, William Law says that Hiram Smith and Joseph both spoke against it in the High Council and in the Elders' Quorum. Secondarily, Joseph Smith and Hiram acknowledged that a revelation had been read, but said it wasn't to do with polygamy. It had to do with marriage and sealing. The question is, are they lying or are they telling the truth? Okay. You assume they're lying. The question is, are they telling the truth? And when it comes to the High Council meeting,
I don't assume anyone is lying, Jeremy.
okay, the conclusion you've made, that's the same thing as me. You've made a conclusion that they're not telling the truth.
Based on the evidence, all the evidence. And I'm actually not sure what you're talking about here because I'm monitoring the live chat, but I just wanted to make sure that you understand I'm not assuming anybody's lying.
The trouble is we already have, RFM, you were making this point before the show that because, again, the most generally accepted perspective is that we have Joseph Smith lying about polygamy. We have Joseph Smith misrepresenting the Book of Abraham, the writings of Abraham written by his own hand. We have Joseph Smith claiming to know the Adamic language when it looks like English made funny, Engelsman and all the work that he does there. So we have instances of Joseph Smith where he doesn't appear to be frank or accurate. And RFM, you were making the point before the show started that how could we know? It's like having two guys in a room where one has to always tell the truth and the other one has to always lie, and they both tell you they're telling you the truth. And how do you know which one is? Why can't you start with the assumption the other direction and say maybe it's Smith and Hiram maybe it's Joseph and Hiram that are lying? Because if we let those two things stand, all the rest of this makes sense. By the way, Jeremy, this is what I mean by putting a document up on the screen. And when I present Cowles and Sobey, this is what I mean by the audience going like, oh, they take the alternative position. They don't like polygamy. They would want nothing more than Joseph Smith to be innocent. And yet they find that Joseph Smith is clearly the author of polygamy. It's the kind of evidence that's very different than the evidence you're presenting when I asked you about your best stuff for the Clayton journals, where you're talking about binder protectors and changing places in journals. This is the kind of thing you would put way more weight on. I don't know what to do with that. Like, do you have, again, surface level, why do you dismiss Sobey?
Why do I dismiss Sobey? Because he was an investor in the Expositor, and we're getting his testimony decades later. Okay? He's
an investor in the Expositor, but what if the Expositor is telling the truth? What's wrong with being an investor in the Expositor?
Okay, what if? What if they're telling the truth, or what if they're not? The question is, are they? Okay, Joseph Smith and Hiram on June 10th, they declared and published in the paper that what Austin Coles had said was a lie. They published that William Law said was a lie. There's a ton of context. This is why I said, look, if you want to just have a little tete-a-tete for 30 seconds and then call it victory, that's fine. But this is a long conversation that involves multiple talk of multiple revelations, Joseph and Hiram's public denials, Joseph preaching against it in the High Council. William Law said that what he said was much shorter. James Whitehead said that he saw the revelation. It was much shorter. There's credibility issues, serious credibility issues and bias with William Law and Wilson Law and the Fosters. They were involved in a plot to kill the Smith family, to pay Joseph Jackson $500 to kill the entire family.
Can I just make an observation, Jeremy?
I'm just spewing this out. Why?
I just want to make an observation that it's also much easier to prove the earth is round than that it's flat. It takes days and days of presenting all sorts of evidence to prove the earth is flat. It takes 5 minutes to prove it's round.
We're talking about Austin Coles and Leonard Sobey, and you asked a question, and then you pivot to flat earther, Holocaust denier, moon landing denier.
No, I didn't say Holocaust denier. What I'm saying is, you're saying it takes days and days to present all the evidence to prove your side, and I'm saying that's analogous to proving the earth is flat, which is not true.
In the same way that you're saying, let me discredit William McClellan, let me discredit Leonard Sobey, let me discredit Austin Cowles, let me discredit we'll get to Thomas Marsh and Oliver Cowdery. Let me discredit. All you have to start with is discrediting Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith, and then you get to like, and then all of a sudden, all the pieces fall into place.
I understand. I understand your impulse is to believe the contemporaneous accusations and the inconsistent stories that come decades later. Okay, again, I'm okay with us disagreeing here. That's cool. I really just want the audience to get a feel for how both sides see evidence and interpret evidence. So that's Leonard Sobey. We can move on from him. Again, by the way, I want to put on the record, Bill, that this is exactly the conversation I asked you that we wouldn't have, meaning that we could have a reasonable discussion about some narrow stuff. You're going from topic to topic to topic and by the way, that's fine. But the point appears to be you want to win a debate.
No, I want, first off,
I'm not interested in winning a debate. A discussion about documents that actually gets into the nitty-gritty of the documents is what's important to me. And for those people who are watching, this is you have done exactly, precisely what we discussed that you wouldn't do.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid debating. I'm trying to give you a second to offer an explanation. And then I'm trying to come in and say like, hey, I don't see the weight of that. And I'm giving you a chance to respond.
I understand.
And so I'm not trying to fight with you. I don't think I win. I don't think you win. I think the audience gets to hear both sides, and that's what I'm after.
I think it's counterproductive, and it's kind of it makes no sense to address complex documents and issues with surface level discussions. Now, that's fine if you want to have that. It's doing no good to advance anything other than you say, hey, my side makes sense, your side is ridiculous. Explain.
All right, let me say it this way. If you're wrong, we can turn it around if you want. We can ask if I'm wrong. If you're wrong, how could we go about convincing you?
That the weight of the evidence actually shows that Joseph Smith was not consistent, that he didn't fight it, that you can find some contemporaneous anchor that actually backs up the accusations and the claims. Not that you show me a list of accusations that were never founded, and that you show me decades later stories that themselves are incongruous and have serious contradictions. The problem is, you bring up William McClellan. If you want to go into the documents, let's go into the documents about someone like William McClellan. You make claims about something that happened back in 1835, 36, 37, based on a statement from William McClellan in 1872. The question is that reliable? But people read it into the record. Why? Because they just simply love what he says, and they don't actually spend the time to weigh out whether it's a reliable statement or not. So I get into the weeds of the documents. You want to say, look at this, and you didn't like this phrase in text, gish gallop, this giant thing that we're going to throw at you, and deal with it, okay? So you have to deal with them on an individual case-by-case basis. You have to deal with them. If you don't, that's irresponsible historical work.
Okay, then let's deal with the land deeds. What better explanation do you have for that?
I don't buy your theory. I think your theory is based on a statistical model that, according to one statistician at least, I hope you find someone else who can back up your model. Like I said, I'm not a statistician. And I'm not going to play in your sandbox on the statistical model, and neither are you a statistician. So let's.
Well, you're
I think
statistics with history again. Are you doing this intentionally? The statistics, the history, or excuse me, the professor of statistics agreed with Bill. It is not a coincidence. That's the statisticians, and that's as far as they can go.
He did not agree with it. He did not agree with him on the conclusion that it's
that's not statistics.
That's a historical conclusion. So you're missing it. The statistician gets to say whether it is exponentially difficult to explain by coincidence. The historian tries to explain the why.
You're assigning a conclusion that he did not give you, Bill. I don't know what you're reading, but you're reading something into his words that I think if you brought him on live, he would go, no, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean that your conclusion is correct based on the
statistical. Bill never said that.
But you're drawing a conclusion to say this means, ergo, this non-fixed number, a debated quantity of who knows how many wives, equals something that you cannot claim. Bill, I think the Landis argument. I think the Landis argument based on statistics is just junk. It's a junk way to approach the history.
Bill said that the statistician, who we all agree is the one who's qualified to speak on the subject, said that the assigning of half of these land deeds to single women in Nauvoo was statistically significant, and it did not happen by accident. Period. End of story. That's all Bill said.
That's assuming that they're wives.
No, it's not.
Well, you're working.
It's assuming they've been identified previously as wives by legitimate historians.
This shows you're thinking about the problem in the incorrect way. You're going through this again. Flat Earth is an extreme. I'm not saying polygamy denier is like flat Earth, but there are people who believe in the flat Earth, and no matter how much you try to convince, I said earlier, how could I convince you you're wrong if you are wrong? I have changed my position on so many things. It just takes evidence to do it. I've sat with Clark Abood and I've been like, hey, let me give these guys a chance. Let me see if there's merit to it. I don't know of any historians who have switched sides after studying this. All right, let me move on. The Nauvoo Expositor has so many things where William, Jane Law, Austin Calls are making connections in the Nauvoo Expositor that clearly, to me, seem to represent very much similar language, similar theology in D&C 132. I've heard Michelle Stone talk about there was some other revelation, but then these are the worst parts of 132. These are the parts you'd want to run away from. Why are these parts in the Nauvoo Expositor when William and Jane Law aren't exactly Brigham Young's friends?
The only thing that the expositor proves that there was some kind of revelation floating around with those elements. What it doesn't prove is that that's what Joseph received somewhere and around July 12th of 1843, that he preached on July 16th. Joseph Smith denied it. Hiram denied it, and you have to deal with those denials. There was talk of multiple polygamy revelations before that and after July 12th. For example, in 1840, there was a group of Mormons operating under something called the Companion Revelation. The Companion Revelation was a formal revelation taught to a bunch of Latter-day Saints in Manchester, England. Those Manchester Saints practiced a form of spiritual wifery polygamy under that revelation. There was a revelation told to Martha Brotherton by Brigham Young that he said was not yet written down. Catherine Lewis reported talk of a revelation. Augusta Cobb on February 4th, 1862 mentions in her private letter to Brigham Young, she says, in fact, over a decade, she says, I demand that you show me the revelation you promised to show me that was written down that Joseph received about the two of us. A polygamy revelation about the two. That's what Brigham Young induced her to leave her husband and 7 children and follow him to Nauvoo. When they got there, he never produced the revelation. She was still asking for it for over a decade, and then he sealed himself to her. Okay, why is that important, Bill? You just want you want context, or do you want just a simple answer? The context is Brigham Young in this letter is talking about a revelation, a polygamy revelation, and inducing a woman. In that letter, she says, you made me promise not to see Joseph Smith alone, and I kept that promise. And the reason you said I shouldn't see him alone was because if I did, he would take sexual advantage of me. Okay, that's what she admits in the letter. So Brigham Young induces a woman to leave her husband and 7 children. He isolates her from Joseph Smith. She says, you said Joseph would come and seal us. When he didn't come, you sealed us yourself. So the question is, what revelation? What revelation? There's talk of multiple revelations floating around. William Law says the revelation he saw was much shorter, 2 to 3 pages. James Whitehead said he saw the marriage revelation that Newell Whitney had, but it had nothing to do with polygamy. Are those things relevant? Okay, are they material to this conversation, or does all that matter is they said it, so therefore it is?
Well, William Law said he got it from Joseph Smith or from Hiram Smith and took it home to read it with his wife, right?
He says that in the affidavit, but in a much later statement, he says, yeah, I read the one that was published, but the one that was published, I distinctly, in all caps, he writes, it was much shorter, only 2-3 pages. It didn't have the theological introduction nor a lot of the doctrine. It just mentioned polygamy.
But it's still about polygamy. That's why he's mad about it.
No, the question is, was that revelation what ends up being published on August 29th, 1852? So here's the question I have for you. If the one William Law saw was much shorter, how does that end up being the one published August 29th, 1852?
Well, why does his wife say it involves men getting 10 virgins if it's not about polygamy in the same?
No, I'm not arguing it's not about polygamy.
It sounds like you are until I call you.
No, I'm not, RFM. I'm arguing that there were multiple conversations and multiple instances of people talking about polygamy revelations independent of this.
But there were things directly linked to Joseph Smith by these affidavits in the Nauvoo Expositor.
Yeah, they made an accusation, and it was denied by Joseph and Hiram. The question is,
okay, now get to the end of your sentence, then I'll deal with the denials, and maybe we'll reach agreement. Go ahead.
Okay, the question is what they claim to have seen or what they actually saw, was it the same as the one in August 29th, 1852? Okay.
Well, apparently it has all of these points
of
connection, right?
It does. And what that shows is that there was something at that time. The question is that the one that Joseph Smith received? Because the story behind the Joseph Kingsbury copy is a faithful transmission from the mind of God to the mouth of Joseph Smith to the pen of William Clayton, copied faithfully within a day or two by Joseph Kingsbury, kept by Newell Whitney for years, and then Brigham Young takes it, keeps it in his desk, and on August 29th, 1852, they reveal it to the world. No change, no alteration, one seamless transmission from God to Brigham Young, okay? If William Law saw a shorter document, what the hell are we talking about, okay? If there are various revelations floating around in Nauvoo that all have to do with polygamy. What are we talking? Is it possible that there was a short revelation that had to do with 10 virgins and being sealed against all sin and taking multiple wives? Why is it Jane Law, for example, did not mention what would have been the most obvious thing to mention, which is why did the destruction of Emma? Why didn't they mention that in the affidavit? One of the most damning things in the entire revelation is that God is going to destroy Joseph's own wife. Okay, so why wasn't that there? It doesn't, just because there's correlation doesn't mean it's exact. You call it a smoking gun, it's not, it's a paper gun that's not on fire. And so you have correlation, but you certainly don't have causation. And you have plenty of talk of other revelations going on at the time, and you're not factoring in all of the context. You are seeing what you want to see. And so you're calling me motivated. The motivation is just as much with you as it is with me. If you want to talk real data and documents, then let's have a fulsome conversation about the whole picture, not just the things that you find as your little pet theories.
Yeah, the trouble is, this is what historians generally agree is the best evidence explaining clearly that Joseph Smith is a polygamist and had introduced it. My original question to you is that why do we find the most unhealthiest aspects of D&C 132 in the Nauvoo Expositor? And if I hear you right, what you're saying is there may have been a revelation. It's possible there may have been a revelation contained all of these unhealthy things that is going around town at the same time. And while everybody sees it as coming from Joseph Smith and Hiram, it actually doesn't come from them at all.
I just gave you 4 examples of independent talk of different revelations having to do with polygamy from 1840 to 1844. I just showed you prima facie evidence of different conversations of revelations floating around. I don't know if you've read William V. Smith's a treatise on the polygamy revelation. It's
so
his.
They're really independent, though.
100%. They're different.
They're all independent of each other, springing up independently.
They're of different substance. Absolutely. The companion revelation is unique. It's a different revelation on Hey, Bill, RFM, go read the Joseph Fielding's diary. Don't look quizzically, go read the document, and then you can tell for yourself if it's actually independent. It was in 1840, not July 12th, 1843. Martha Brotherton makes her statement in 1842. Then Brigham Young has an independent revelation that has to do with him and Augusta Cobb, okay? It's a revelation about polygamy related to him and Augusta Cobb. These are independent. They're not the same thing, but they're all having to do with polygamy. And so, look, you're coming at me as though this is a settled issue. There's nothing else here. I'm telling you there's context.
I want people to go read and listen to the things you're saying. People should explore the evidence. Each of these points, though, to the other side are so weighty, and the way that you work around them, it's unconvincing to the other side. And so I'm just trying to get you.
It's unconvincing to you. I will tell you, hey, look, I've had private scholars. For example, I would recommend all of the listeners go and watch my presentation on D&C 132. I've had a number of private scholars contact me privately and say, I was thoroughly convinced by your textual analysis. Okay, so it's not that people aren't convinced. People can't be convinced when they see the evidence. You're not convinced, that's fine. But you're making a statement. Look, I think it's reasonable to hold your view. You don't think it's reasonable for me to hold mine. You categorize those of us on our side as though we have thinking errors, okay? And so I'm here to tell you there's a far more to the story than you possibly want to acknowledge. And this is exactly the exchange that I was telling you I didn't want to have. However, I'm fine to have it, because if you want to debate, we can debate.
I'm really trying not to yell. I'm just trying to go through issue and just get you on the record.
It is your characterization, Bill. Your characterization, your smug characterization of people on our side of the aisle as though it's not reasonable to do the things that we've done. Have you watched anything that I've done? Have you actually analyzed the arguments that I make? Okay, have you watched and analyzed the arguments that Michelle makes? Have you made a reasonable rebuttal of the things that she talks about? Okay.
Yes, I've done all that. By the way, Bill may be smug,
you did not debunk
yes,
my
I did. Yes, I did. Bill
did.
Reel may be smug, but I'm downright insulting when it comes to characterizing people on your side of the offense, and I should probably repent.
I know you are.
But here's a place where I think we can reach agreement. Okay, And it has
On
to
the
do
Lott
with
Family
Joseph
Bible.
Smith's denials, Joseph Smith's public denials about polygamy, right? Because you mentioned those at the beginning of that last segment, I think.
His
I think
public
we can
denial.
reach agreement here. Okay, so if Joseph Smith is not practicing polygamy, we can expect that he would deny public accusations, correct?
Yeah.
Is it not equally as likely that if Joseph Smith were practicing polygamy, that he would also deny public accusations?
Yes. But he would deny
Therefore,
public
therefore,
accusations
his
of polygamy.
public denials cannot be evidence of either side of this issue, correct?
No, they're a contradiction that you have to resolve. They're not evidence. They're accusations and denials.
No, a denial, if you would make a denial, whether you're practicing polygamy or whether you're not practicing polygamy, the denial itself becomes meaningless as evidence. Correct? Do we agree on that?
A denial is a denial. It is simply a statement of someone saying, I didn't do that.
But if we're saying, because we're looking at, was Joseph Smith practicing polygamy? Was he not? I believe he was. I agree with the historians. You say he was not, okay? And you have your evidence that you rely on to believe that, and I understand that. All I'm saying is that this particular piece of evidence about I believe Joseph, right, when he denied practicing polygamy becomes meaningless because his denials have no evidentiary weight, because he would have denied it if he were practicing polygamy, and he would have denied it if he were not practicing polygamy.
Sure. A denial is not proof of either thing.
No, but we agree that it's meaningless in this specific context with Joseph Smith, correct?
A denial is meaningless unless it's true.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about denials in general. I'm talking about a denial of practicing plural marriage made by Joseph Smith is completely meaningless because he would have made the same denial whether he were practicing it or not. Do you understand what I'm saying, Bill?
No,
Do you understand, Jeremy?
that's not correct. That's not
Hold on,
correct.
Jeremy, hold on.
That's not correct.
A denial by someone who would give that denial regardless of whether they're telling the truth or regardless of whether they're lying is useless.
That's my point. Do you agree with that, Jeremy?
I think a denial, depending on the circumstance, has more weight or less, depending on what's going on.
But the circumstances here render any denial meaningless, correct?
Because if he would have could, however, the weight of the denials and the opposition to polygamy all go together. So, for example, he fought in the legal courts and took people to court to sue them for defamation and slander. When you sue someone, you open yourself up to cross-examination. If you're going to sue, for example, Chauncey Higbee in 1842 and open yourself up to cross-examination, all it takes is one disgruntled neighbor who saw you with ex-wife or ex-girlfriend or whatever to say, yeah, I saw them. So you put yourself at great jeopardy. He did that, I believe, on 3 occasions and proposed a 4th lawsuit and defended himself against a 5th. And so Joseph Smith was constantly in court denying in the legal setting, okay, these accusations. That's a different kind of denial than just, I didn't do this in a random scenario. When you deny
the church courts or regular
legal courts,
civil courts,
civil courts. He fought the polygamy accusations in the civil courts. Okay, 5 different occasions. Oh, sorry.
Which he would have had to have done, regardless of whether he were telling the truth.
No, he would not have. He brought the lawsuits.
It's a SLAPP lawsuit or an anti-SLAPP lawsuit or whatever it's called. In other words, all I'm saying is his denials and his lawsuits don't mean that he was practicing polygamy.
No, not by themselves.
He was not practicing polygamy.
No, they're one piece of evidence you factor in. He fought them in the courts. He opened himself up to cross-examination. He persecuted polygamists in the High Council. His scriptures.
But only after their polygamy became public, and he was forced to in order to distance himself from it, like he told he would do to William Clayton, right, Bill?
He makes the back again. We can say it's not true, but if it's true, Joseph Smith makes a backroom deal with Clayton. By the way, it's a strange thing to include that stuff years. I have a hard time figuring out how Clayton is so conniving and complex and putting all these kinds of stories out there for the backroom deal where he tells Clayton that, hey, I might have to punish you for a season, disfellowship you essentially. I'll rebaptize you. I'll bring you back in You be loyal to me, I'll be loyal to you. Once you have that story, if you're going to weigh things in a fair way, you have to recognize there could be other situations where Joseph is playing it one way publicly and another way privately, and that seems to make perfect sense. I think RFM's point is true, and I think it's not really something that either one of us have to like fight for to win to have it work for our side. It's that Joseph Smith denying polygamy would be true if he's telling the truth, and it would be true if he's lying about polygamy.
Well, of course, but that goes for any kind of denial, period.
Yeah. And he wasn't taking it any further than that. He was just asking you to acknowledge that statement is true, that in and of itself.
I'm not frankly sure what your point is. The denials are one part of how Joseph Smith opposed polygamy during his lifetime.
But they can't be one part if they have no evidentiary value. It's a brick that has no substance to it. It doesn't.
I disagree 100%.
But
If you go
why?
hold on a second. If you go to court and you publish in the paper and you get affidavits sworn up and you have scriptures all in your favor, and if you have high council trials to root people out of the church, if all of those things are in the category of denials, if you will, they're fighting against the doctrine publicly, I argue those things matter. They all matter. I don't know why you believe that because Joseph denied it, we can't use that as, quote, evidence. That's what he did to oppose the practice. The whole litany from, frankly, 1830 to 1844, okay, it's a consistent trail of evidence where he's opposing any form of spiritual wifery, polygamy, multiplicity of wives, plurality of wives. You don't have anything in the evidentiary record, in the contemporaneous record, other than that, other than Clayton's journal, if it's contemporaneous.
Let me tell you what I would find significant, and maybe you have it. If I'm Joseph Smith and I'm practicing polygamy, of course I'm denying it when I am publicly accused of it. And when someone that I've authorized to says, hey, Joseph Smith was in on it, of course I'm going to deny on it. I'm going to do everything that I would expect my audience to think I would do in order to show that I'm innocent. But here's my understanding, is that Joseph Smith did this only after polygamy accusations involving him.
No.
Or polygamy accusations in Nauvoo became public. Did he ever root it out himself? In other words, if he only did it after they became public, then that's part of the self-defense and self-perpetuation motive I'm talking about. But did he ever actually himself go and root it out and find somebody who was not known publicly to be doing it, and then
that he was doing it himself?
Like Brigham Young say. Did he ever bring up Brigham Young practicing polygamy?
According to his brother, just weeks before his death, he was going to bring Brigham Young up on charges.
So
according to his brother.
That's a no. He didn't do that.
Before he started being accused.
This is all about my question, just to make it clear for the audience, is that I'm thinking that if Joseph Smith himself rooted out someone who was practicing polygamy privately and then brought them to the public and excoriated them or whatever, that would be more significant to me as evidence than if it's someone that gets brought to the public's attention as practicing polygamy, and only then does Joseph Smith take
the first time he did that. The first time he did that was in July of 1841. Okay, before all the polygamy revelation comes to be, he brought John Bennett and Francis Higbee, who confessed to seducing women. He brought both of those men before about 60 to 70 men.
That they'd already been accused by other people.
No, they had not been. No, they had not been. Not by that point. No. July of 1841. This is how the whole thing with John Bennett kicks off. According to the multiple witnesses' testimony, John Bennett confessed, Francis Higbee confessed to seducing multiple women. And Joseph later would say, he begged me not to do anything, begged me not to tell his mom, begged me not to kick him out of the Nauvoo Lodge. The Nauvoo Lodge wasn't created at that point, begged me not to excommunicate him. And he said, I worked with him and I never should have, because from that point forward, things got worse. But that's when it started, was in July of 1841, and Joseph hauled him, along with Hiram, in front of about 60 men. Okay, so that's the first instance. There had been excommunications for polygamy prior to that. Solomon Freeman was excommunicated, I believe, in 1837. There was another excommunication, I'm forgetting the name, in 1841 for polygamy. Joseph Smith wrote against polygamy in the Letter from Liberty Jail. He wrote against it in the Elders Journal in 1839. He had published the article on marriage 4 times over the course of his career. starting in 1835 all the way through 1844. And so the public opposition, the actual bringing people to heel for these things didn't start more frequently until people started doing it more frequently in Nauvoo. And so
yes. I think that anomaly is interesting and works in your favor. I also think that during the time of alleged Joseph Smith's polygamy, it's interesting that for a man who is willing to discipline anyone who suddenly gets caught, that there isn't more effort on his part to root out those who are doing it. I want to ask you three more things, and then I'm happy to start.
There isn't more effort to root them out. How do you know that there? How do you know that there wasn't? 1842. He spends most of the year dealing with that subject. The book of the law of the Lord is riddled with his response to have to deal with what's coming at him from John Bennett.
Yeah. I'm not talking about denying the theology or
you're talking about rooting out men who are practicing it.
So again, I'm trying to slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
Joseph is so adamantly against it. And what tends to show up, what RFM is pointing to is what tends to show up is what looks like the backroom deal that Clayton says he made with Smith. And we get other instances where
you're talking about Harrison Sagers, right?
Yeah, where the appearance of that. Again, outwardly, it looks like that explanation could fit that. And so Smith is when a man goes and says, hey, Smith told me I could practice polygamy. I'm approaching a young woman, and that woman ends up speaking out, and it doesn't work the way that guy hoped it would. Then Smith's right there, ready to punish in a way that at least could match William Clayton's description of that backroom deal. Sure. And what RFM's saying is that it would be really strong evidence if we could show Joseph Smith, rather than being on the defensive, of being on the offensive. And not just, I would expect
you have it for a number of years.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what you're looking for.
That's okay. The one you mentioned in 1841 with Bennett is sufficient to at least set a counterexample.
1841. It's March 24th, 1842, when they haul 9 men into the High Council. They take testimonies of 4 women. Those 4 women talk about John Bennett sleeping with them 10 to 12 times, and Chauncey Higby and Gustavius Hills and a number of others.
It sounds like that somehow that came out first before Joseph was dealing. No.
Here's how it came out.
It was a huge scandal.
No, here's how it came out. Sarah Miller testifies. Joseph Smith preached against this stuff to the choir. Okay. It was because of his preaching, it pricked her conscience and it got her to come forward. And then all of the details came forward. And then the stories that roll out from there with John Bennett and others about Sarah Pratt and about Nancy Rigdon and about Martha Brotherton all start to percolate. And Joseph is dealing with those things. And he's on the defensive and reacting to these things that are being publicly said about him. And he's dealing with that nonsense for the better part of 1842. So you're asking, why isn't he persecuting people? How do you know that he knows that there's more than the 9 men who are going around doing this?
Yeah, no, I'm going to move on only because I think it would be near impossible to demonstrate how Joseph Smith could discover somebody in polygamy without someone else coming forward and talking about polygamy. Hence, it seems like it's always going to be Joseph in response, but also I wouldn't, I'm just saying in your favor, I wouldn't expect otherwise, because the only way he could discover polygamy where someone else isn't speaking about it is that Bennett goes to Smith, or Joseph Smith walks in on Bennett sleeping with someone else. Otherwise, it takes a third party saying scandal, and I can't imagine how we would come to have it happen in a way.
It starts in July 1841. Bennett confesses. Then he gets a reprieve, and he goes and does it again, but does it worse, and 4 women come out. Yeah, because Joseph preaches a sermon. That's the order of events.
I'm siding with you in part, and so I'm just acknowledging that, and we can move on. Again, I don't think it's proof of anything, but it's an anomaly that's interesting that I think works at least as part of the counterexample.
It's one of a long trail. You mentioned denials. It's one of a long trail of Joseph opposing this adamantly, publicly, in sermons and publications and trials and high council meetings. That's what you have in the record. That's what you have to deal with about his opposition to it. Now, he could be lying about all that. He could be just a total two-faced, duplicitous human being, but you have to reconcile the full evidentiary weight of what he's doing, okay? And then once you've done that, once you acknowledge everything he's done, then you can make up your mind as to whether or not the accusations have weight or not.
Yeah. I'm agreeing, again, in part with that. Again, when we read the Clayton journals about the backroom deal, it leaves a lot of room to see Joseph Smith as duplicitous. It allows a lot of room to see. So
I agree, Bill. Let me agree with you.
Yeah.
If Clayton's record is trustworthy, 100%. I can't make the arguments I make if Clayton's record's trustworthy.
Yep. And you say it
is. I argue and will argue. And the question is, what will the weight of eventually the public opinion be on records like William McClellan, like Clayton, like John Bennett? Are those trustworthy accounts or not? And that's the playing ground. Okay.
Yeah.
To figure out if the public will be persuaded by whether or not William Clayton is a trustworthy character in a record that no one can prove when pen touched paper. And so that's the crux of the entire argument.
Yeah, I think the audience understands that as the crux of your argument. So I want to just say
No, it's the crux of the entire argument about every piece of evidence. Okay. Meaning William McClellan, meaning Thomas Marsh, meaning how we assign weight to what Oliver Cowdery said, for example. Okay. It's all of that combined.
I want to ask about those. So when I get to the Melissa Lott Bible, I remember listening. I don't remember Michelle Stone's exact theory, but I remember listening going, that is so much more absurd than just accepting this as a family Bible with this information in it accurately. So we have these two entries, and on the bottom left, it's basically the bottom of the full large section before the gap, and then a piece written, and then a gap, another piece written. It's enlarged in the top left. It talks about how Melissa Lott is given to wife. It doesn't name the husband. That's a strange thing. For me, it looks like on the front end, that's much more easily explained, that I'm trying, Joseph Smith is marrying my daughter, my sister, whatever it is, and I don't want to put Joseph's name in there and link them in the record. And then I get to the next entry, which is in the top right of the Bible. It's enlarged there on the second left. And now she's Melissa Smith. And again, historians and scholars see this as clear evidence that in the top left, Melissa is being married to Joseph Smith. And in the bottom left, by the time she marries another husband, she is now Melissa Smith. I don't remember what Michelle's, but I'm curious what your response is to be able to make this not mean what most historians make it mean.
Most historians don't make it mean what you make it mean. Okay, it's not most; it's some. For example, Mark Tensmeyer, who's not an historian, but he's probably one of the best people on your side of the argument for the documents. He agrees with Michelle's conclusions about when this was created. If you look at the very bottom entry on the left-hand side, that entry was created in 1848. The very next
entry. I'm understanding you, a non-historian agrees with another non-historian's conclusion about a historical
if we want to talk about who historians are, most of the people who've done the work on this, the five primary authors, George D. Smith, Van Wagner, Brian Hales, Todd Compton, Fawn Brody, they're not historians. Okay.
Here's one, Dan Vogel. He's done some work on it, hasn't he?
Yeah, and Dan Vogel is also not a trained historian. He's a historian by his work. Okay, so Mark Tensmeyer can be assessed based on his opinion, and you can determine whether you think it's credible or not. But he agrees with Michelle Stone's analysis that entry was created after 1848. If you look at the very bottom left entry, where it says 1848, the very next entry in different pen than the other ones, okay, was created at a different time than the entries on the left-hand side. The entries on the left-hand side don't specify to whom she was married. This is not a conclusive document that can be dated, meaning those entries on the top right, cannot be dated to 1843 when those other entries are. So
Yeah.
it is not provably a contemporaneous record.
Yeah, the dating alone doesn't make this a problem. People
Yes,
can have,
it does. The dating is material.
uh,
It's absolutely material, Bill, because if they're writing it after she is going west, for example, and by the way, there are many women, Augusta Cobb being one of them, who considered herself Joseph Smith's wife without ever meeting the man. She would call herself in letters, "I am Joseph Smith's widow," and she would recruit other women to marry Joseph Smith posthumously to enter his family, women that never met Joseph Smith. So it's not beyond the realm of reason for someone to consider themselves, after having been sealed in the Nauvoo Temple in 1846. By the way, Augusta Cobb was sealed to Joseph Smith in 1848,
no,
and she considered herself his wife. So this is not proof.
Yeah.
This does not establish that she was married in 1843. That's what you're trying to say.
No, I'm not. I'm making a different argument. I'm simply saying that someone taking a family Bible,
yeah,
and a year later, 5 years later, recording their family history in this format,
okay,
leaving Joseph Smith off because that would be embarrassing, or don't want to share it, it's sacred, it's secret. And then in the next entry, noting that Melissa Smith, because you sort of want to at least leave some record somewhere that it happened. It could be late, and it doesn't necessarily mean that something.
It absolutely could be true, but it's not proof of contemporaneous recording, which is the argument that this is used, right? It's just proof. It's proof that someone at some point considered her Melissa Smith, just like Augusta Cobb changed her name to Augusta Smith at certain points. So what does that prove?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So my question though is, I was trying to make the reason I'm stammering is because on one part I need to respond to what you said, which is I wasn't trying to make an argument that this could be nothing and it could be something.
Yeah.
But when you take the Melissa Smith and the top one, again, I understand you've got historians who disagree, but the historian you noted, he disagreed with it being contemporaneous.
Yeah.
He disagreed that this is evidence of a Joseph Smith relationship.
I would think so, because Mark generally agrees with the evidence leaning toward Joseph Smith doing it. But the contemporaneity of this entry is how it's used by those who want to use it. They want to use it as a contemporaneous document. That makes all the difference in the world. If someone recorded on that day that they were married, she was recorded to Joseph and called herself Mrs. Smith, that's germane. There are no records anywhere else besides this, by the way, where she calls herself Mrs. Smith. There's challenges with her temple lot testimony later. These are not simple. Just because it's written down that she considered herself, or the family considered herself part of the family, that it means that she was married to him. Just like I gave you a germane example, Augusta Cobb and the women that she recruited considered themselves part of Joseph Smith's family, and wives posthumously of Joseph Smith.
Yeah, I'll move on. There's things I want to ask about it, but again, each one of these, I know you feel things from the conversation. It's been heated in moments for sure. And yes, you did say before, I don't want to get into some heated debate. My point is that I don't know how both sides get together and this side shares this evidence and that side shares that evidence without a lot of passion coming out and a lot of raising objections and trying to point out pushback from that side. But I'll move on. Martha Brotherton, I heard Michelle Stone make this, again, the way she had to work around the story is it's clear that Martha Brotherton to her is telling the truth.
Yeah.
So now the workaround needs to be that can't be Joseph Smith, because if that's Joseph Smith, again, that becomes a problem. So Michelle Stone's narrative that she's come up with is a doppelganger. Again, again, it can maybe not be absurd. It just feels to me like an absurd explanation. Is that how you deal with this, or do you or other polygamous have some other way to confront?
No,
story.
With the Martha Brotherton affidavit, I think what's really important to understand is when you deal with any of the accusations by John Bennett, you have to have the context of those of what John Bennett is doing. First off, two of his best friends in Nauvoo, Chauncey Higbee and Francis Higbee, published letters publicly in the Times and Seasons and the Wasp in November and December of 1842. And they explained in those letters, actually, it was Elias Higbee that published Francis, and Chauncey published his own. In those letters, they said to the public, John Bennett is forging material from us. He's forging 4 letters and claiming they came from us. Now, just consider that for a second. They are saying that John Bennett would forge the letters of his own friends. So the question is, when we deal with the subject of a single source who makes a claim, John Bennett, about Martha Brotherton, without the original affidavit to check, okay, is it possible, if he's willing to forge the letters of his own friends, that he would forge that? Anything else and any other accusations? Let me give you a second thing. John Bennett he said he caught Joe Smith in bed with Catherine Fuller. Catherine Fuller testified that she slept with John Bennett 12 times and didn't mention Joseph Smith. Okay. Let me give you another thing. Both Joseph and Hiram stood up on April 7th, 1842, and they denied any rumors that had been floating around. At that time, it was Hiram that was involved, not Joseph Smith. So the story changed from April 7th to when it was published in the Sangamo Journal, and then it was published in the History of the Saints. Another
Jeremy,
point.
Is your position that John C. Bennett forged or changed this affidavit from Martha Brotherton to publish it?
I don't know. It's impossible.
Why are you bringing up all this other stuff?
Because the question, okay, RFM, the question is about the reliability of any particular claim.
No, the reliability is, the question is about whether this is an actual affidavit from Martha Brotherton. That's
if you read the affidavit, and you read the rest of what John Bennett writes, it's in the exact same voice with the exact same type of rhetorical flourishes. It feels like John Bennett's words.
So however, there's not Martha Brotherton.
I don't believe Martha Brotherton wrote the particular part about Joseph Smith. However, we won't know. But here's another data point. Charles D. Miller hold on. This is a data point that's relevant, RFM.
Jeremy, hold on. Here's what this is trying to be worked out, is that you have to take a stance. Like when an apologist goes over here, I'm going to use the tight translation. Over here, I'm going to use the loose translation. It's a problem. And so you want to leave room. Like, I'm not saying that John C. Bennett forged it, but I'm sharing with you lots of reasons why.
I just explained to you, I believe that the rhetorical flourishes you can't say definitively. I'm being responsible. You can't. The rhetorical flourishes read like John Bennett to me. So I'm actually making a conclusion.
Yeah, but you believe definitively about this. In other words, you might want to portray it to the audience like maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You should consider these evidences. But this account, if true, would be damning.
Of course it was, if it were true. If it were true, that's the question. You're doing something that E.H. Carr says, fetishizing documents. You're just believing the words on the page. Something that Grandma used to say, don't believe everything you read.
Phil's not doing that at all. I reject that accusation. Go ahead.
Well, so are you cross checking this with anything else?
No.
What is your basis for establishing that this actually reflects what Martha Brotherton wrote?
You're trying to find out what your answer is for it. That's the only thing. We're just trying to find out what your explanation is.
I just gave you context, RFM. I gave you context that he's willing to forge letters of his own friends. Is that relevant?
Document.
Jeremy, I didn't make any of those. I didn't say anything about my own personal belief about the Martha Brotherton account in reference to this conversation. I only said you have to take a stance.
Okay.
Do
I believe that it's forged? I don't know for sure. However, the rhetorical flourishes indicate to me that most likely there were things in there changed by John Bennett. I don't know what else you want.
Perfect. You don't believe the Martha Brotherton account is historically.
I believe part of it, and here's why. Charles Miller has a meeting with her family in England shortly after this, the event goes down. In that meeting, the Brotherton family tells him Brigham Young proposed to Martha. He does not mention Joseph or Hiram. That's material. Why? Because that family leaves the church. They would have every reason to communicate the full picture of the leaders of the church involved. They mention Brigham. They don't mention Joseph Smith or Hiram. That's an important detail. So we have a picture here that you have to decide whether or not that portion of it that names Joseph Smith is accurate or truthful. That's all.
Two things. One, Far as I know, Martha Brotherton never repudiated this statement, right?
Martha Brotherton never made any statement. That is neither here nor there.
Okay. Secondarily, when Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith and others deal with Martha Brotherton's story, they don't claim that this testimony isn't true. They claim that Martha had been deceived or understood. She's lying.
They categorically look. At that point, those guys believe Brigham Young. Okay, they believe him, and they categorically deny the rumors going around in the April conference. And at that point, remember, it was Hiram that was the first one accused of being a part of that engagement. Hiram first, then it changes to Joseph, but the Charles Miller family doesn't mention it. So you have to put these pieces together. Plus, we have John Bennett willing to forge the letters of his own friends. So you have to ask yourself, since we don't have an original affidavit to check, can we trust the particulars of any particular claim?
Okay. The last one I got is Cowdrey, and the filthy, nasty Scrape.
Yep.
I know the apologists fight over Scrape and affair, but when we look at David Patton's words, he also calls it a scrape. And if you read his account of being in the room with Joseph and Oliver, it seems to me he's like, yeah, like these guys are like nod, nod, wink, wink. I'll say this, I'll say that. It doesn't look good.
No.
Then you've got, Thomas Marsh, and he's writing Joseph away from the thing, and he's sort of handpicked. Patton is let go from the council, and Thomas Marsh is put in place to oversee things. It doesn't look good, and then the letter doesn't look good.
Yeah.
What is the way to get away from Oliver Cowdery's letter about an affair and his being charged for charging Smith with adultery?
That's an excellent question. I go through this in detail in one of my episodes. It's called No Sex, No Polygamy. I go through all of the contemporaneous data related to Oliver Cowdery and his excommunication trial and everything we know related to sex and Fanny Alger. Okay, so that's in there. You can go watch it. However, here's the details. Oliver thought for sure something happened. But what he communicates to his brothers isn't that he knew something happened, but that he thought. In fact, in that letter, he says, as I supposed. What he was most mad about in that letter was being called a liar. Joseph Smith said, hey, you're lying about me. And he said, no, I didn't lie about you. That's what I thought happened. That's the substance of this letter. Now, when he was confronted by Patton and by Marsh, and then they brought testimony in the trial. In those interactions, Joseph Smith is present. And Joseph Smith says, did I ever admit to you anything of the sort? Did I ever admit to you, I told Emma, that anything ever happened? And Oliver said, no. And that was his testimony thereafter. In the trial, there were 12 men. 4 men who would be excommunicated shortly thereafter. Those men never said anything about whatever the girl business was. 4 men who would become ardent polygamists. Those 4 men never said anything about, quote, the girl business. And 4 men who would become opponents of polygamy. And by the way, one of those men was Brigham Young. One was Ebenezer Robinson. And so we've got men who would be excommunicated within months. 12 silent men who don't indicate anything of anything going on. Then we have Oliver Cowdery in 1846 being very surprised in a letter he writes to Phoebe about polygamy going on in the church. He's like, what's happening here? And he says, I can't believe the heads of the church practice this. Then we move to 1848. His final testimony about Joseph Smith is that he died a prophet faithful to the end. So you have to assume Oliver, I don't know, believed he practiced polygamy but didn't care. The way that I read this document is that Oliver absolutely believed something went on. But what does it tell us and what does it not tell us? He believed something went on. Joseph confronted him. They had a confrontation. It was only one of 9 charges brought against him in the High Council. He was excommunicated for 6. And that was one of them for defaming the prophet, basically.
But it was one of them.
What's that? It was one. Yeah, it was one of them. And so was counterfeiting, and so was bringing lawsuits. So it was one thing that he never responded to. It doesn't mean, look, if you think it means he knew that Joseph had an affair with Fanny Alger, you're reading something into the documents don't say.
How certain did Oliver Cowdery have to be to bring charges against?
He wasn't certain. He didn't bring charges against Joseph Smith. He never brought charges. The charges were brought against him. And he says expressly, I didn't, as I thought he had done this, but Joseph denied it, and so there we are. And he never said a word after that. So you're reading something into the documents that isn't there.
Well, then why didn't he just take it back once he became convinced that Joseph Smith didn't
He
do
said,
it?
"I
Joseph
leave that
Smith
to
denied
future."
it to him.
He says, "I leave that to future generations." He doesn't explain it. That's all we have. If you want to read into something that's not there, you're welcome to, but it's not
We have
there.
a letter from Oliver Cowdery to his brethren, which he accuses Joseph Smith of.
No, he doesn't. No, he does not. What he says, read the whole thing, RFM. What he says is a thing was talked over, a dirty, filthy, nasty scrape / affair, as I supposed had happened. What does that mean? The English language says, as I thought had happened. What he's mad about is that Joseph was calling him a liar. That's what he's mad about, not because he still believed definitively that something happened, because he supposed and didn't ever produce any evidence of anything other than his supposition.
But okay, he didn't just come up with this out of the air, though. You're not suggesting that.
Okay, so no. I have my theories, but we only have theories about what happened. I have no idea.
Some evidence.
Or have you ever thought somebody did something that you later found out, oh, that didn't really happen?
I'm not writing it in a letter about a guy who's supposed to be the prophet of God, and I would write him in.
Have you ever told somebody else, man, I thought he really did that, and you come to find out later I was wrong?
This is not that.
He's not writing in the letter, I saw Joseph. Okay, this is the English language, RFM. He's not writing, I saw Joseph Smith with Fanny. He's saying, I thought Joseph had done something, and I didn't like being called a liar. So I wasn't lying. That's what I supposed. That's what the document says.
But what you're suggesting is that this rather over-the-top allegation against Joseph Smith from Oliver Cowdery, of all people, the second elder in the church, you know how high up he was.
Yeah,
100%. That's meaningless. You're saying that over-the-top, incredibly damning allegation is meaningless.
I'm not saying it's meaningless. I'm saying that he made the insinuations. We don't know where, we don't know to whom, because we don't have that record. He was confronted on it, and then he never said another word after this letter. That's all we know. And then in his trial, we have 12 men who heard all the quote girl business, and they didn't conclude anything further. That's what we know. You can interpret all you want, but it's not in the documents.
I think it is in the documents, but you're refusing to see anything in the words that contradict your theory.
Show me where.
Right here.
Show me where. No,
right
show
here.
me where. What does the word I supposed mean?
What is the words filthy, nasty affair? As I supposed, as I believed it to have been. He was not a direct witness.
We're going to argue over the English language. I supposed he was guilty. I suppose. I thought so.
No, he supposed it was a nasty, filthy affair, I think.
Right.
The ceiling.
Supposed.
By the way, I think these juxtaposing versus a ceiling, it seems to me, again, I could be wrong.
There's no word of it. There's no talk of a ceiling at that time.
No, yeah. Okay. All right. By the way, I just want to know, people in the debate are like, Bill asks a question, Jeremy gives evidence, and then Bill runs to the next issue. But then I'm also in trouble if I stick around and give you pushback. So I'm
you're debating over one phrase that he couples with, I thought that's what happened. And you want to say that at that time, Oliver's still saying, I know that's what happened. Yeah. That's not what he's saying.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that, and Bill's not saying that.
So how is this evidence that Joseph did anything? How is that evidence?
Oliver Cowdery alleged it, and a reasonable person would presume he didn't do that based on nothing.
Okay, so he alleged it, and what happened? What happened, RFM? What happened after the allegation? What happened after the allegation?
Well, did he get charged with that?
No.
Having made that?
No.
He didn't get charged
what happened was what happened was a series of meetings, okay, where he was confronted by Joseph and other witnesses who said, did I ever say these things? Okay. And he said no. And then he was brought up on 9 charges, not by Joseph Smith, by, I believe, Samuel Cutler. And then he was excommunicated on 6 of them, one of which he never confronted. And so therefore that was left in as one of the charges. But you are reading into something that's not there. You're saying just because he made an accusation. Look, I really hope none of us believe that accusations are proof, that someone's thoughts on something are proof. Simply because someone thinks something and they don't provide evidence of it, that's proof.
Oliver Cowdery is not Joe Schmo. He's Oliver
You're
Cowdery,
assuming that he knows.
In the church. The very fact that he would think this was true is significant in my mind.
And it's not.
It is significant. Yes, it's significant. But what does it mean? Does it mean
he felt he had a basis to think that, to suppose it was true?
Yes.
It means he felt, Oliver Cowdery felt he had a basis to suppose this was true.
What does it mean?
That's what it means.
Does it mean that he knew it was true?
No.
Does it mean that it was true?
No. It means that he felt he had a basis to believe it was true.
Right. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. But you take it further to say, therefore, this means Joseph is guilty.
Well, no, I'm saying, therefore, it's evidence in my column and not evidence in your column. But you're trying to
I think it's evidence in my column it's evidence in my column of this trial being absolutely not definitive of anything.
And you
100%.
You just proved my point.
You proved my point. I mean, we can go back and forth all day on that. You know, I mean, for real.
I'll call it a tie. Well, by the way, we've had a great conversation. I think
we can go to lunch. We can have a sandwich.
Oh, I told you before, by the way. I'll say this again. I've said it numerous times. I could hang out with you and any of the polygamy deniers all day because your morality at least matches mine. We both are disgusted
100%
polygamy if it's true.
Oh, if Joseph did it, I'd be fully disgusted 100%. I'm disgusted by Brigham Young's. I'm disgusted by Chauncey Higbee. I'm disgusted by the whole lot.
And you would be disgusted by Joseph Smith if it turned out that he actually were practicing polygamy.
I will agree with you 100%.
Yes.
100%. That on that we can wholeheartedly agree.
We're sitting here as all three of us, to some degree, amateurs who have spent a lot of time looking at historical data. We think we do a better job than you. You think you do a better job than us. The audience gets to decide. And the people who came here thinking you get it right are probably leaving here thinking you get it right. And the people who came here thinking we get it right left here thinking we get it right.
Yes.
Sufficient enough. I want to ask you a question. It's not a gotcha, but I really want you to reflect and just help me understand. You point out, you've done a beautiful job tonight with every one of these issues, pointing out anomalies that would help that side who sides with you to go, look, guys, there's so much room here if you would take these documents seriously and follow the chronology and see the things that maybe you're missing. When we go back into like the first vision, we mentioned it earlier, there's anomalies there. And I'm not playing gotcha like, haha, you do this thing here and you do this thing there, but rather I'm trying to really find out. I'm curious about how you take situations that I know you sense in a faithful way. You wouldn't fight for this issue unless you thought Joseph had a vision in the grove.
No, that's not true.
Really?
You don't believe Joseph had a vision in the grove?
No, it's not true that I wouldn't fight for this historical issue if I wasn't a believer in that. You see, you're assigning a motive to my historical investigation.
But you do believe Joseph had a vision in the grove?
I do.
Okay.
Great. You believe he was a liar. And so both of us have a conclusion we've drawn, but we can all still be objectively analyzing the documents. I believe you can, and I think it's helpful if you can at least assign possibly that I can as well. Whether you believe that or not, I'll leave that to you. But I don't think it's reasonable to just make an assumption that I make my historical analysis surrounding my belief.
And I don't think I'm doing that. I don't think Bill was doing that. I have no dog in this fight. I don't care if Joseph Smith was a polygamist.
I don't either. It doesn't, there's enough other things about Mormonism lying to me and enough other things about Joseph Smith's character that polygamy to me, I don't need it to be one way or the other. Again, I'll apologize then for trying to connect your motivation in this area to your motivation about the gospel of Jesus Christ as delivered through the restoration of Joseph Smith. But I still am, the question I wanted to get at is how do you work with anomalies over here? And those anomalies are so big and they draw you to run counter to the generally accepted beliefs of historians and the other folks delving into this material. And then you get into other anomalies in Mormonism and you're like, that doesn't really, I'm okay with Joseph telling the vision 12 years later, only saying the Lord appeared. I'm okay with the writings of Abraham written by his own hand, but it doesn't match the Egyptian and the papyri, and the missing scroll has problems, and the catalyst theory just seems like a way to explain what the critic's seeing, but to make it work in the faithful favor and leave room for for faith. In other words, it was a response to the fact that things don't add up. How do you deal with all of the other anomalies in Mormonism that if you take these anomalies seriously in polygamy, these other anomalies should lead you in some direction as well?
I think it's very fair. I am not the same student of those issues that I am of polygamy. That's been my primary focus for 11 years, although I'm fairly familiar with some of the detailed arguments of a lot of those things. For me, and you can take it for what it's worth, if Joseph doesn't start out, as a fraud, I can reconcile the discrepancies between the First Vision accounts. I don't have any trouble with it. Other people can't, but I do. For me, the Book of Mormon, I don't know that I side with the traditional apologists on the Book of Abraham. I have a nuanced view about that. That's a long conversation. And not only that, but I'm not prepared to do a historical deep dive. But what I find is oftentimes there are similar challenges to something like the Book of Abraham, where it's what people said about Joseph, not what Joseph said. And so we're dealing with, late accounts and things that we have to piece together. And how do you reconcile those things? That goes for things in the book. I have my way of looking at the Book of Mormon and dealing with anachronisms or dealing with proto-Isaiah or the various issues or the names within the locality where Joseph Smith is. Some of those things are pure questions of faith. Others of those things that, because I don't start from the position that Joseph Smith is a fraud. Meaning,
by the way,
and I can, by the way, hey, I can appreciate that.
I don't want it to be true beyond anybody else's wish. I was as Mormon as it could be. I wanted nothing more than Mormonism to add up, and I just found apologetics so lacking.
Yeah, hey, by the way, I agree with you. I don't typically. I find apologetics irksome. Typically, I'm not a fan of those things, and so I won't try to make bad arguments that I haven't studied at all. When it comes to matters like this, I have my way of approaching it. I spent a long season of my life as an agnostic. I have wrestled with my own evolution of thought, of childhood faith to semi-adult faith to missionhood to going through family life and then abandoning faith altogether and rediscovering it. So the faith matters are somewhat different than the intellectual exercise, but for me, I approach this as, do I find evidence that Joseph Smith's a fraud? And I don't find that in the historical record. I find that that people accuse him of it, and I find that there are many evidences of people saying and giving a lot of narratives, but I don't find that as being something I can lay at Joseph's feet.
Yeah, and that would be a whole other conversation.
Sure.
I'll only say that the debate about polygamy isn't in a vacuum of just polygamy. If other issues weigh in on Joseph's credibility, then those also affect this argument that we've had tonight. In other words, if he is not credible or untrustworthy in 10 other places, maybe for some at least that would tip the scale on this topic if they're on the fence but leaning on the polygamy denier side.
I can appreciate that. And I look, it depends on who you give weight to. When Joseph Smith writes in his personal journal, with no one watching, it's the delight of my soul to be honest. That doesn't mean I believe him, but that's interesting to me that he writes that in a private moment. And that when he says to people, I taught all the strong doctrines in public, I didn't teach any to the highest anointing of the church. That's interesting to me. When he preaches the things that he preaches, when he puts the DNC 101 into the scriptures and he publishes it 4 times and he makes that the anchor of the church, I find that interesting. And so the question is, how do you reconcile? Look, part of the work that I'm doing on my channel is to lay out the full contemporaneous history in a way that I don't believe anyone has done before. I'm not done yet. I'm just to 1839. I haven't got to Nauvoo yet. I'm in England right now. Actually, I'm in 1840. And there's a whole other history going on in England that no one has ever addressed, to my knowledge. And so that's very, very relevant to this discussion. If there is independent spiritual wifery polygamy going on in England, not connected to Joseph Smith, is that important? And I say, absolutely, it's important. If Brigham Young is working behind Joseph Smith's back and he's doing things that Joseph Smith doesn't know with Augusta Cobb, for example, is that important? I think it's important.
Here's
So,
what I want to ask as we're closing.
yes. By the way, guys, hey, despite me being heated, I've appreciated this.
Oh, I think you did great. I don't think you've heard
the
people
well,
who
hey,
your way.
You guys deserve
you could have done a better job arguing your position against us, both of us, than you have tonight. I don't know of many people.
I will tell you, very few people. I'm Voldemort to a degree, for some reason.
That's way too cool.
In some circles. And so I appreciate that you were willing, to take a chance to have a conversation. And hopefully when you're out here, we'll go to lunch. I really mean that, because I have in my circle of association, it's filled with people who just don't agree with me on everything. And so it doesn't matter to me in terms of human interaction. And I hope that can be the overriding sentiment at the end of this conversation.
And I do too. I've got one question for you, and it is a gotcha, but I want your honest, direct, brief answer. It's basically a yes or no answer.
Yeah.
Do you believe that the evidence supporting the Book of Mormon is greater than or less than the evidence showing Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy?
That's a hard question. I don't know. I mean,
do you think it's even in your mind? Is it just as strong a case that the Book of Mormon is really ancient as it is that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy?
I don't know how to weigh that. I know the documents intimately on the polygamy side. I don't know the argument intimately. I know it at a macro level, meaning I've listened to hours and hours and hours of you guys and other people talk back and forth about these issues. I don't know the documents, and so it's hard for me to make an assessment. Look, I'm compelled by the value and the truthfulness, for me, of the Book of Mormon. It is a book that is precious to me, and yet I can take off my religious hat and I can put on a researcher's hat and look at a document and say, what does it say? What does it not say?
But does your researcher's hat drink beer?
Depends on what time of my life.
Let me finish this thought. I was saying earlier, I could hang out with polygamy deniers all day because our morality matches. I am deeply bothered by
By the way, I think Dan is a good guy too.
Yeah.
Sorry, hey Dan, I think you're a good guy and you and I should go to lunch. Sorry, I just interrupted you because I had to. Go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead. I think apologist Brian Hales is a great example, and there's plenty of them who come along and go, Joseph did practice polygamy, and I'm perfectly okay with him grooming young girls. Yeah. I'm perfectly okay with him sending fathers and husbands on missions. I'm perfectly okay with how he carried it out. Hey, that's the way the Lord wanted to do it. Who am I to argue with that? And where the polygamy deniers and the post-Mormons are going to always agree is like, that's shitty morality. And at the very least, we have to take a stand on what's right and wrong in terms of healthy ways and unhealthy ways to treat each other.
Yep.
And for that reason alone, Fair Mormon, Dan Peterson, Brian Hales, I'm grossed out by them. Whereas at least with the polygamy deniers, I'm like, I think about these things differently, and I think I'm thinking about them in a better way, but that has nothing to do with the goodness of that side's humanity. In fact, the whole reason primarily that side has taken that stance is because they want to believe in Mormonism. Again, you can find exceptions. I'm not saying it's everyone, but they want to believe in Mormonism, and they cannot accept the grossness of polygamy.
Yeah.
Right? So they start tracking down the data, and they have this group who says, look at the evidence. It says Joseph Smith is not the author of polygamy. To whatever degree, it's convincing enough that people find it convincing, and they believe that direction. And by the way, I wouldn't be surprised if tonight you won more people over to your side than we won from your side over to ours.
I would be.
I think you did a hell of a good job defending your point of view. I'm sorry for the moments where you felt like, I got caught. I didn't intend that. If I can just be honest, I think RFM came a little intense in the beginning, and it sort of set us down that track.
He's like my dad, man. You're just giving me my dad vibes. It's all good. I appreciate it.
The lawyer's forced to blame in any situation. I accept it. It's part of my job. By the way,
I love my dad.
Oh, thank you. EJS has been asked this question over and over and over. And geez, I thought I'd address this, but they keep asking. Now they paid $10. So we've got to say something. It says, RFM and Bill, would you guys be happy to find?
Oh, sorry. Here it is.
Okay, it was only $5. Now here's a $10 version. RFM and Bill, would you guys be happy to find out that Joseph was innocent of polygamy? I thought I'd said this before. I addressed this comment earlier. It's been repeated over and over. And I said, I think I just addressed that. I don't care if Joseph practiced polygamy. I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't be sad. It would be, if it's the truth, I'm happy to find it out.
Yeah. By the way, same answer. First off, you should have held out longer. If he started with $5 and then made a $10 super chat, maybe he would have gone to 20 or 30 or 50.
It was my joke about the 5 when you cut me off halfway through.
I got it.
Or no, when you dropped it halfway through is what happened.
Got it. I'll just say same thing as you. The evidence is compelling for me, but even if Joseph Smith is not a polygamist, I'll give an example. Michelle Stone, still active in the LDS tradition. She sees the people who came after Joseph, again, to some extent, you too, see the people who came after Joseph as being the ones who created the unhealthiness of polygamy. And if we get rid of Joseph Smith, we still have to confront, if we believe in the church, that Brigham Young and John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff, that they're not only doing polygamy, they're also engaging in polygamy with significant age differences, a level of religious coercion, manipulation, and unhealthy approaches. Save the beautiful women for us. Don't take them all before they get back here.
That's an understatement.
I'm bothered by abuse of children, and I'm bothered by religious coercion, whether it's in Mormonism, the LDS faction, whether it's in the fundamentalists, whether it's in Scientology. And so my life's work is to try to draw attention to unhealthy religious behavior. And if Joseph Smith turns out to be innocent of polygamy, I still have other things that I don't find good about Joseph Smith that are good enough for me to step away from him. And I see enough dishonesty and deception in Mormonism that there's no way I could ever make my way back to it. I don't know Joseph Smith to be a polygamist, and I believe a certain way. We fought about it tonight, but I'm not invested in such a way that if the evidence was clear cut, I would have no problem going like, hey, Jeremy turned out to be right. Joseph wasn't a polygamist, and I still would have the same position about everything else that I have.
I appreciate that. And on my show, I made a pact with my audience, the very first episode. My aim is not to change people's belief, whether they're in the church, out of the church, RLDS, fundamentalist. It's just to give a broader data set of information. And that's what I aim to do. I have a conclusion that I've reached at this point. It's always open to more evidence if there's other evidence that shows differently. But what I try to do is just give a broader picture of the full scope of the context of any particular claim. And there's a lot more to anything that we want to talk about that fits into the simple narrative, okay? Whether it's Oliver Cowdery or Fanny Alger or any of the wives later or John Bennett or anything that happened in Nauvoo. There's a much broader picture. The thing I argue for the most is acknowledgement of the full context, and then wrestling with it, and how do people interpret the full context, and not just simply selecting a few documents and saying this is what that means. That's the work that I do, and to the degree that we're able to get some of that on the table here today, I really appreciate it.
Jeremy, do you want to plug your products and your podcast by name?
I appreciate that. My podcast is Still Mormon. You can check it out. I've got a number of episodes that are running through the contemporaneous history. There'll be a book coming out called The Clayton Conundrum.
I've heard of
you
that.
can read you can read the full argument there. Despite not convincing my new friends here, that's fine. I still recommend everyone wrestle with the argument, because when you're dealing with the full data set of all the things in the Clayton journals, the traditional model can't explain them. And Robin Jensen himself said, I can't explain it. So the question is, how do we interpret this record? And I think we make a substantial case that they need to be reclassified, not as contemporaneous diaries.
Yeah. By the way, I would encourage people, go watch it. My only complaint is to take it all in. You have to watch like 400 hours.
I know.
Stone.
I know. Hey, but you've done the same thing with some of your episodes on. So we're in the same boat sometimes.
Yeah, we are. By the way, thank you for coming on. Again, apologies for any hard feelings, but I promise this: if you and I are ever in the same space together, dinner is on me. Or
on me.
Well, I appreciate very much you coming on.
As long as I'm not paying.
Yeah, he
Well,
won't. He's not.
we'll give you the breadsticks.
Folks, please like and subscribe. It means a lot to us. Please go to mormonismlive.org, click the donate button, $5 or $10 a month. I hope you enjoyed tonight's conversation. I hope that it was a lot of information. I think it's really hard to tackle this issue without both some confrontation as well as sort of getting lost in all of these documents. So please go check out Still Mormon. I honestly check out 132 Problems of Michelle Stone and understand the issues, but also check out Dan Vogel and those on this side.
Check out Dan for sure. By the way, Dan, you're the only guy responding to what I do, so I appreciate it.
Yeah. And by the way, responding good or bad is good. It's good anyway. It does. It gives exposure. And your side has been growing pretty quick. So I think the exposure is not hurting you guys. So good for you.
Hey, I appreciate you guys very much. Thank you.
No problem. Folks, we'll see you next week, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time for the next episode of Mormonism Live. Outside of that, have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for coming on the show, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.